That day did not portend anything bad. The Qinglan and Linghan twins were frolicking and ran far ahead. The mother asked them to wait for her. Suddenly, Qinglan heard some incomprehensible sounds from behind and perplexedly turned around, still not realizing what had happened. Their parents stood embraced, as if oblivious to the warriors around them. The couple's clothes were splattered with blood. The girl shrieked and ran to her parents. She couldn't let anything bad happen to them. A huge explosion occurred before Qinglan's eyes. A dazzling glow illuminated the entire area around. The girl froze in place. Taking advantage of his sister's temporary confusion, Linghan grabbed her hand. The girl turned around perplexed. The older brother quickly ran away without letting go of her hand. He explained as he ran that the enemies were already catching up with them. Hiding behind a thick tree, Linghan handed his sister his clothes. He ordered her to change her clothes and hide. What they really need is her. The young man turned aside and added that the girl would have to take care of herself now. He would take care of the rest. Qinglan didn't want to be without her favorite little brother for a moment. She shouted that she wouldn't let him go anywhere. Linghan silently turned to his sister and handed over the clothes for her to hurriedly throw them on and deceive her enemies. Qinglan hid behind a tree. The young man ran towards the pursuers and shouted to his sister to run away quickly. Not even a minute later, the guy met up with a group of swordsmen. They mistook him for his sister and said that Mu Qinglan couldn't escape. A fierce battle was going on the high cliff. Huge rocks were breaking off in the gorge due to the violent energy release. Mu Linghan was able to stop all the enemies. Unfortunately, he himself fell off the cliff. Qinglan barely had time to grab his arm and tried to pull him out. Unfortunately, the girl was too weak to pull her brother's weighted body out with one hand. Their hands parted and Mu Linghan flew into the abyss. Qinglan burst into tears. She had lost her entire family in half a day. The young man did the best he could. He was too weak because of the sword lodged in his chest. As he breathed, he prayed to the heavens that his sister would survive. Then the relatives picked up the weakened girl and mistook her for Mu Linghan. They mocked her for her lack of vitality. The man frowned at the girl and demanded that Linghan be sent to the side branch. Here he would only be a hindrance. Mu Qinglan sat on her knees. Her entire body was trembling. The girl couldn't believe that all of this had actually happened. She fidgeted with Mu Linghan's cloak and roared nervously. It was all she had left as a memento of her brother. At that moment, the girl realized that she was no longer on that mountain. Her face was covered with sweat. It turned out that Qinglan, due to extreme fatigue, had fallen asleep on a stool by the kitchen table after a strong tea. She caught herself thinking that she'd been having this nightmare every day for the 3rd month now, and there was nothing she could do about it. Suddenly, the girl saw a large man in the doorway and became very frightened. Her relatives came to abuse her again. The man in the white cape angrily said that someone had robbed Mu Ye's elder brother. Qinglan mockingly replied that the mutt had been giving voice since morning. The guest turned red with anger and asked for a repeat. The guy calmly stated that he had called the man a mutt and loudly enough. He couldn't stand it any longer. His fists clenched by themselves. The man lunged at the arrogant young man. The girl had no intention of evading the attack and took a fighting stance. This man had been looking for trouble for a long time. Linghan intercepted the guest's hand by the wrist and began to twist it. The man couldn't break free and groaned in great pain. At this moment, Mu Ye appeared on the doorstep. He declared that no one in this house would even think of stealing his pill. The girl let the guest go. He immediately felt his injured arm. Qinglan stated that all this talk meant nothing. Mu Ye smiled and reminded the young man that he was still disabled. This is the best evidence to incriminate him for stealing the miracle pill. He contemptuously told Linghan that his vitality was dropping lower and lower, and he would be better off committing suicide. The girl was silent. It was all true. She felt herself growing weaker and weaker. Unfortunately, no one could help her. Mu Ye stated that the guy killed his parents and sister just to survive himself. Stealing is the order of the day for him. The young man promised to keep his relative alive if he willingly handed over the stolen pill. Qinglan turned her head unhappily. Mu Linghan wondered how the guy could even think of being able to stoop to stealing. Mu Ye irritably advised to watch his words and directed a strong beam of energy at the girl. Her legs went under, her body hitting the table as she fell. A clear liquid flowed out of the fallen and cracked teapot. Mu Qinglan knelt down exhaustedly in the puddle. The girl felt very weak. She tried her best to straighten up but only provoked severe pain, and moaned. Mu Ye laughed victoriously. He declared that the person everyone called a genius couldn't be so weak. The young man replied that he was a genius before, unlike Mu Ye, who doesn't have that now, or in the distant future. The guy's interlocutor became enraged, and angrily shouted that Mu Linghan himself was clearly looking for a quick death. Mu Ye jumped forward, intending to knock the opponent down. The girl put up a block to slightly reduce the damage. The young man pressed his foot to the floor. Under the toe of his boot, the tile cracked and small splinters broke off. Mu Ye boasted that with a little more effort, He would become a Yuanze. But Mu Linghan might not even dream of that. Because of the solid defense, the guy couldn't do anything to his relative. He mockingly said that Mu Ye was not capable of anything. A man dressed in green appeared in the doorway and reminded them of the upcoming family test. Only trained warriors were allowed to take it. Mu Qinglan was a little distracted and shifted her block too late. Because of this, Mu Ye was able to knee her in the stomach. The girl collapsed on her back, groaning in pain. The young man lowered his knee smugly. He enjoyed watching the boy suffer. Mu Ye glumly promised that he would keep the young man alive this time, but there would be no mercy for Linghan in the family trial. The girl raised her head and made an attempt at a smile. She said that it remained to be seen who would be spared in the family trial. 2 weeks passed. The elders had gathered a few dozen men at the mountains of the 9 slopes. All of them were to show their skills today. The man in the green kimono opened a notepad and solemnly announced the beginning of the family trials of the Mu residents. The participants animatedly began to discuss the trials. The man added that the winner would be the one who got the most yuan pills. He warned the challengers not to go deep into the mountain. It was too dangerous. Even the elders would not be able to save them. The participants of the family challenge looked at each other in surprise. The host hurriedly started the competition. Mu Ye looked at the arrogant Mu Linghan with hatred. These 2 weeks, he had been restraining himself as best he could and conserving his strength. But today, the boy won't be able to survive. The great Mu Ye will make him regret living to see the ordeal. He called out to the young man who was trying to get farther away and stated that he was offering to join forces and join their team. Mu Qinglan smiled. She knew very well that Mu Ye wanted to get rid of her quickly. The girl herself wanted to settle the score with him. Linghan willingly agreed to join the team and headed towards the main group. Mu Ye watched him with a smirk. He summoned his personal squad and with a careless gesture ordered them to follow that guy and keep an eye on him. Qinglan could see perfectly well that Mu Ye had purposely lingered behind with his entourage. The confrontation was getting interesting. The advance party moved slowly along the forest path. It was quiet and peaceful, with only the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. Suddenly a loud rustling sounded clearly in the bushes. Vanguard stopped anxiously. It sounded like a beast. Immediately, a white tiger with a brown pattern on its head jumped out in front of them with a roar. It belonged to the second-grade yuan beasts. Mu Ye solemnly told Linghan that he was granting him the right to be the first to fight the white tiger, decorated with a brown pattern. Mu Qinglan immediately took a few steps back towards the tree so that the young man was in front of her. Linghan recognized that his martial skills were negligible compared to Master Mu's skill. Only he could defeat the beast. Mu Ye glared angrily at the young man, not paying attention to the fact that the dangerous beast had already made its leap. It was only after the warning that the boy belatedly turned toward the white tiger and barely managed to dodge its claws. At the same second, Mu Ye ducked under the ravenous beast and displayed a martial technique called 8 Winds Fist. Still, the white tiger managed to hit his opponent. A bloodstain was spreading in an even groove across the boy's chest. When he saw the blood, the young man shuddered. Mu Linghan mockingly said that he had a better opinion of him. Judging from his fight, he couldn't even advance as far as Yuanze. The boy demanded that he stop teasing him. Now he was even angrier at his little brother. Meanwhile, Qinglan soared into the air and declared that Mu Ye should be more careful. The young man was startled to discover another tiger. The girl jumped onto one of the higher branches. It was very convenient to watch the events below from here. Tearing off a green leaf, Mu Qinglan pressed it to her lips thoughtfully. She wondered how quickly Mu Ye could deal with the tiger. The boy was very displeased with the quick appearance of the new predator. He shouted to his troop that he was entrusting the tiger to them. The 3 men pounced on the white tiger with the brown spot at the same time. The beast did not know who to attack first. Meanwhile, Mu Ye concentrated a clot of blue energy to the side. He would prove that he had performed the best in the trials. At the right moment, the young man rushed to the tiger and with a lightning blow cut off its head from its torso. A golden core appeared in the air, emitting a bright energy. It seemed to be hovering inside the disc and shining like the sun. Mu Ye began to clench and unclench his fist. His hands were a little numb after the blow and he needed to bring them back to normal. The guy proudly said that this pill yuan belonged to him by right. One of his flatterers said that Mu Ye was very strong. The girl was still standing on the wide branch of the tree, listening to the young man's praise. She was in no hurry to leave the safe haven. Mu Ye walked over to the tree and looked at Mu Linghan meaningfully. The guy said that it was now his turn to show off his skills. The young man smiled and replied that he understood perfectly well the team's plans to get rid of him. But right now he'd better worry about himself. Mu Ye got angry and demanded to get down from the tree immediately. They came here on business, so stop fooling around. Linghan asked, looking around more closely. All 5 of them were stunned. About a dozen white tigers were slowly squeezing them into a ring. The young man shouted from the tree that he had forgotten to warn. These white tigers with brown patterns are quite sociable. It was only now that Mu Ye began to suspect that the tigers were here for a reason. He accused Ling Han that the predators were here because of him. The guy in the tree laughed. He had to admit that there was an element of truth in his relative's words. Mu Ye became angry. He cursed himself for letting the young man go along with them. No one could have thought it would turn out like this. Pressing the green leaf to her lips, Mu Qinglan still stood serenely on the tree branch as she continued to admire the view from below. There was not a single bit of hatred in her eyes. At the same time, she realized that it was too late to retreat now. Mu Ye wouldn't forgive her. In fact, all the fighters were already bloody and could barely stand on their feet. One of the guys was begging for help. The tiger had bitten his knee. The young man excitedly thought that this could mean the end of the ordeal. They could all die in an unequal fight with the animals. He fearlessly rushed into the thick of the tigers and struck a predator that was trying to bite off the leg of his companion. The guy had arrived just in time. His assistant's leg was already covered in blood. A little more, and he would have been left without a leg. Mu Ye helped the young man up and took him to the side. The body of the rescued boy was shaking convulsively. It's not every day they try to eat you alive. Still stammering after the experience, the man thanked him for the rescue. The young man stared at him, judging that it would be hard to run away with him. In the same second, the leader pushed the surprised boy right back to the tigers. The warrior shrieked. He'd rather not feel anything right now. The striped predators smelled the appealing odor of blood and scurried for a treat, pushing each other away. Mu Qinglan looked sadly at the unfortunate fellow who had been abandoned to his fate. He had been treated too cruelly. The girl jumped up and wished for a good time. There was nothing else to do here anymore. The angry Mu Ye would turn against her with his clan. Once the beauty landed safely, the spirit of the plank enthusiastically remarked that she had quite a few tricks stashed away. Qinglan replied that she always responded to others' feelings proportionately. Today, she didn't want to smear her hands on people. The spirit warned the girl that her life force was down another point. She'd better find a safer place quickly. Mu Qinglan looked around carefully and moved to a spacious lawn at the back of the forest. She crouched down. This place was a suitable place to rest. Wasting no time, the girl closed her eyes and immediately began to meditate. Pure energy flowed from her body. From afar, it was like a sunrise. A spiral of fire appeared in the air. In the depths of its swirls, the outline of a dark jade tablet was easily recognizable. For as long as Qinglan could remember, this broken writing tablet in her body had always absorbed life force. The girl had always been tormented by one question. She couldn't understand where the plaque had come from and what it was for. The spirit replied that Mu Qinglan should find the rest of the plaque. In that case, few people in the Shenyuan Empire would be able to match her strength. The girl looked intently at her interlocutor and wondered why he didn't practice the techniques himself, since the tablet had such power. The spirit turned purple with anger and shouted that it was just locked inside. If it wasn't for its overwhelming power, it would have lost its life long ago. Mu Qinglan thought for a moment. If she really managed to find the missing pieces, she wouldn't have to regret being exiled from the Mu family. The girl remembered that she had survived only because of the patriarch's good attitude. If not for him, she would have lost her head long ago. The spirit of the plaque was of a different opinion. He recalled that it was because of the patriarch that Qinglan was excommunicated from the main branch of the family. The girl remembered that horrible moment when her and her brother's hands separated. She tearfully watched Ling Han fly into the abyss. Qinglan firmly stated that she and her brother are still one. Sooner or later, she would use Ling Han's name to avenge him. She scornfully told the spirit that he was always hiding in his board and had never once talked about his dreams. The spirit replied that he would tell her about it later. The girl continued to provoke him and suggested that he was just a freak because he didn't show his face. The spirit of the plank took offense and responded in kind. Mu Qinglan didn't even pay attention to the insult and asked to at least give her name if appearances were such a secret. The ghostly entity thought briefly. The spirit agreed that it might be possible to open up a little to the owner of the plaque. He quietly introduced himself. His name is Shuiyu. The girl was surprised. Even the spirit's name sounded formidable. He might have been a strong cultivator in the past. During the meditation, a strong wind came up. It seemed to be able to tear off all the leaves in the forest together with the branches. Mu Qinglan felt a strong gust of wind and opened her eyes in surprise. There was someone else here. Apparently, there was some kind of strong cultivator present nearby. The girl didn't understand where it had come from in the first place. She immediately got up from the ground and prepared her dagger just in case. Unfortunately, her strength still hadn't recovered. While Mu Qinglan was looking around, a white-clothed man appeared from the bushes and raised his hand conciliatingly. The girl looked at the stranger with surprise. It was the first time she had seen this gentleman, and she didn't know what to expect. Mo Yu rushed towards Mu Qinglan, intending to grab her. At the last moment, he was stopped by an imperious male voice. The young man slowed down and turned his head back in bewilderment. He had not expected to see his lord in the middle of nowhere. A tall man in snow-white robes slowly began to emerge from the bushes. His demeanor betrayed that he was of high birth. The young man's black hair was tied back with a golden diamond barrette and a blue jade ring on his wide leather belt instead of a buckle. Mu Qinglan immediately recognized the man, but she incredulously clarified whether Yunyi himself had really come to this forest. The young man looked at Mu Linghan with a frown instead of answering, and asked how he managed to survive that battle. The girl smiled kindly. She said that fate itself had brought them together so far from home. No need to be rude. Mu Linghan recalled that his sister had once saved Yunyi, and that in itself was worth a lot. The young man turned away and remembered those twins. They were equal parts cheerful and conniving, pure and cunning. Especially that Mu Qinglan girl in the yellow outfit. Constantly smiling, she allowed herself too much. Yunyi glanced frowningly at his interlocutor, and angrily remarked that his own sister's death had no effect on him. Mu Qinglan's hands shook involuntarily. She hid her hands deeper into the sleeves of her blue clothes in an attempt to calm her trembling. The boy replied that it was not worth talking about, for he was a worthless creature to everyone. If that was all, he would move on. He said this in such a contemptuous tone that Yunyi's eyes involuntarily wept. He remembered that Mu Linghan used to be very strong. The man shouted back to the guy walking off into the distance that he could help him with his regaining his strength. Mu Qinglan couldn't believe it. She remembered very well how she had made this young man suffer together with her brother. And now he had decided to help. Linghan bowed and said that it was impossible. His vital veins were completely destroyed. Yunyi replied that it was not a problem for a 5th-rank master. The girl turned pale. According to her guess, there would not be a single rank 5-star array master in the entire Shenyuan Empire. Mo Yu was also surprised by Master's behavior. The master had always been cold-blooded, but now he decided to personally help the guy. The black-clothed man descended behind the girl's back quickly and suddenly. He noticed with a smile that Yunyi was here for her girlfriend. Feeling the stranger's presence and hearing his voice, Mu Qinglan turned pale. Unfortunately, it was too late. He grabbed her neck and pulled her to him. Linghan rudely replied that the stranger was blind in the first place. There was no need for him to be that jerk's girlfriend. The man in the black cape stared at the girl's face and mockingly said that it was indeed a guy. Compared to the girls, Mu Linghan looks much more attractive. Now I can see why Yunyi is so weird. He's just gay. Mu Qinglan couldn't stand it and rushed forward, breaking out of the young man's embrace. He didn't expect this and was a little late. The girl snatched the dagger lightning fast and quickly put it to the guy's throat. She said angrily that it would be too much to talk about. Suddenly, Qinglan realized that the other 2 men were just watching. She wondered if Yunyi would help. Mo Yu looked at his master perplexedly. If Mu Linghan was not helped, he would die at the hand of the heavenly shadow demon. The energy release of enormous force threw the girl a few meters away. The demon looked triumphantly at the victim. Due to her injury, Mu Qinglan staggered and started to fall down, coughing up blood. Yunyi ran over and helped her up. He rebuked the young man for trying to fight the demon even after losing his life force. It was a rash decision. The heavenly shadow demon smirked gloatingly and prepared another energy clot. He shouted that it was Yunyi's turn. The man flew upwards, intending to attack the guy from a height. Yunyi created a protective sphere. It safely blocked the demon's energy. At the moment of their contact, another strong energy release occurred. Large rock fragments flew out of the dense dust cloud. Mo Yu couldn't believe his eyes and held his head in surprise. His master had actually helped that guy. The heavenly shadow demon landed softly. It became clear that its energy was ineffective against Yunyi. His opponent's strength left him confused. The young man couldn't even imagine that Yunyi had become very strong so quickly. Mo Yu immediately realized where this was going. He mentally begged the master to disperse peacefully. This was not the time to fight. Yunyi fearlessly looked into his opponent's eyes. At this time, the spirit of the plaque informed the girl that a top-grade Yuan beast was now born. Mu Qinglan quickly figured out that top-grade beasts had a 6th step. His appearance was a big event. Without taking his eyes off, Yunyi looked at his opponent. He said that the heavenly shadow demon would have to catch up with him first to kill him. The young man quickly grabbed Mu Linghan's wrist so as not to leave him alone. The girl looked at him cautiously. Continuing to hold on to the boy's hand, Yunyi quickly walked upwards. The demon chased after him, shouting along the way that he wouldn't be able to escape. The hooded youth was bent in half by a sudden knee to the stomach. The unexpected blow was quite strong, and his body began to shake. Mo Yu smilingly suggested that the demon stay for a while and fight him as an exchange of combat experience. The chase quickly ceased. This gave the fugitives an opportunity to find a sheltered place in one of the spacious lawns. Mu Qinglan was filled with mixed feelings. On the one hand, Yunyi had saved her from the demon. But after all, he had come just for him. Mu Linghan glumly told his interlocutor that because of his actions, he himself was attacked and didn't know how to repay him for it. The young man glanced at the boy who was rebuking him and quietly replied that he hadn't even thought it would go this far. The girl was surprised to see that behind the bushes, the entrance to the cave had opened. She had never known there was such a place in the forest. Yin Yu pulled out his hand and stepped a few steps forward. Qinglan looked at her interlocutor perplexedly. Suddenly, right in front of them, a strong gust of wind ripped off a lot of leaves. It was quite strange. There was nowhere for it to come from. Meanwhile, a fiery stream of energy appeared in the air, accompanied by a loud roar. The girl felt a fiery breath. A huge lioness descended to earth from heaven. It seemed to be all made up of tongues of flame. Qinglan turned to the young man fearfully. The spirit board tried to calm the girl down and assured her that it was only a lioness-born fire spirit Yan. After giving birth, fire spirit Yuan crystals remain from them. Thanks to them, the life veins can be nourished. Mu Qinglan frowned, thinking that she had too little strength right now to deal with such a 6th-grade beast. The lioness leaped at the boy with a ferocious roar. The girl barely had time to jump aside, leaving the beast in the care of her companion. Yun Yi knew very well what to do in such cases. He quickly created an energy clot and prepared to repel the attack. The moment the fire lioness jumped to the young man, she was surprised to encounter some sort of protective barrier. The spirit of the plank said that the crystals should be in the cave. The girl assumed that Yun Yi had also come to get them. The ghost replied that it wouldn't be a problem. The young man was currently busy fighting that furious Yuan lioness anyway. Yun Yi glumly informed the lioness that she understood the reason for his appearance perfectly well. If she stepped aside, she would stay alive. Suddenly, the young man was surprised to see that Mu Linghan took advantage of the situation and ran into the cave ahead of him. The 6th-grade Yuan fire lioness also took notice and roared unhappily, turning her head towards her cave. She switched to the new opponent and rushed towards the cave. Yun Yi thought that this act might cost the guy his life. However, this was his personal decision. If the lioness tore Linghan apart inside, he would only have himself to blame. Near the cave, it appeared that the glow was coming from the many bright Yuan fire crystals that formed an entire forest. Suddenly, the girl heard a suspicious sound from behind. An unpleasant chill ran down her body. She turned around and saw a lioness at the entrance. Mu Qinglan shrank back in fear. She couldn't even think that the lioness would return to the cave so quickly. Yun Yi was unable to hold her back. A second later, the fiery predator was where the girl had been before. She was alert and did a backflip. When the lioness saw the man in front of her, she growled in displeasure. No one is allowed to enter this cave without her permission. Mu Qinglan looked around. She couldn't understand where the cub had gone if the lioness had recently given birth. The predator leaped at its prey again with a growl. The girl easily deflected the paw strike and cheerfully said that she only wanted Yuan crystals. The lioness fiercely prepared for her next leap. Qinglan smirked smugly and declared that the beast had chosen its own fate. At this moment, a young man also appeared in the opening of the cave. Yun Yi knew very well that he wouldn't be able to help in time and expected to see the torn body. To his surprise, Mu Linghan was still alive. Moreover, he was cheerfully fighting the fire beast as if it was not a fight to the death, but an innocent walk with a puppy. Mu Linghan swung the bloody dagger with a gloating smile. The muzzle under the lioness's eyes was scratched and blood was flowing from its mouth. Gathering all his strength, the predator jumped forward. The girl managed to step back, and the lioness landed on the pavement of the cave, which began to crack. Huge blocks flew down into the gorge. It turned out that there was a hollow space under the cave. The lioness looked sternly at the enemy. Mu Qinglan looked at the rocks flying into the abyss with interest. When she entered the cave, she had never thought that there could be something down below. Unfortunately, she was destined to die anyway. The girl preferred to jump and crash from a height rather than be torn apart. The Yuan lioness didn't ponder for long and jumped down right behind Qinglan, trying to catch up with her prey while still in flight. Yun Yi pondered for a bit and came to the conclusion that Mu Linghan could only have entered this cave because of the Yuan crystals. Unlike the boy, he was in no danger down below, so the young man jumped down into the gorge following the man and the predator. During the descent, Yun Yi snorted unhappily. Linghan's strength had greatly decreased, but his temper remained as obnoxious. Mu Qinglan descended downward with increasing speed. Here, there were occasionally wicker plants among the rock. Closer to the bottom of the depression, the girl snatched up her dagger and stabbed it furiously into the rock, slowing her fall. When there were a few meters left to the surface, she jumped down smoothly. Now we could wait for the lioness. Upon reaching the ground, Mu Qinglan's first order of business was to shake off and spit out the dust that had clogged her airways during the flight. There was a huge transparent container at the very bottom. The girl moved toward it, hoping that she had not fought the predator in vain. As soon as the warrior came closer, her face lit up with a bright light. This corner was illuminated by a multitude of Yuan crystals. In addition, a lion cub lying on the sarcophagus also served as a source of light. Most likely, he was guarding the treasure. Mu Qinglan was surprised. She hadn't expected that the lioness would have guessed to hide her cub so far away. Suddenly, the yuan crystals inside the container glowed even brighter. The stone from which its walls were made began to crack. The strange vibration caused the lion cub to wake up and look around in surprise. Not realizing what had happened, the girl stepped closer with interest. She noticed that the stone sarcophagus was showing itself in an unusual way. Suddenly, the fire lioness jumped between the sarcophagus and the uninvited guest. Mu Qinglan barely had time to jump back. Meanwhile, the lid of the sarcophagus was cracking faster and faster. The fire lioness took her cub in her teeth and looked around. Seeing that the lioness had jumped off the sarcophagus, the girl stepped back puzzled, realizing that there was nowhere else to run. To her surprise, the predator walked to the side, looking back at the human. The lioness didn't even try to attack her. Mu Qinglan had an epiphany. The fire lioness herself is afraid of something. There must be something terrifying hidden under the stone sarcophagus. The cracks in the sarcophagus were spreading faster and faster, the crystals shining brighter. The girl suspected there was some kind of monster in there. A bright light illuminated the entire underground cave. It was at this moment that Yun Yi slowly descended to the sarcophagus. Seeing the young man, Qinglan assumed that the young man had come here for a reason. He was not interested in the crystals, but in what was hidden inside the sarcophagus. A bright pillar of fire was shooting upwards from the sarcophagus. The spirit tablet said that the girl was lucky. A 9th grade Yuan beast had been born here. She was so shocked by the ghost's words that she didn't immediately believe his words. Even the 7th grade spirit was only seen by the imperial family. A large firebird soared up from the crack of the sarcophagus. The girl immediately realized that it was Zhu Qiwei, the patron spirit of the south. The huge beak of the fiery bird opened. The fledgling accompanied its appearance with wild cries. Eve the fire lioness took a step towards the bird as a powerful flame beam struck it in the side. The raptor had no chance of escape. Mu Qinglan was surprised to notice that the huge lioness immediately fell down. A large pool of blood had formed underneath her. The girl had never seen such crushing power before. The chick felled the 6th grade fire beast with just one blow. The spirit assumed that the lioness was using Zhu Qiwei's strength to make her cub stronger. Sooner or later, there was going to be an end to it. The firebird was angry and took revenge for being used. The spirit offered to make a contract with the fledgling. The girl indignantly replied that she couldn't even handle a 6th grade beast. Meanwhile, Yun Yi silently looked at the firebird that had found a comfortable place on a high stone. The young man glumly suggested to the fledgling to go willingly, or else brute force would have to be used and he would have to capture him. To his surprise, Zhu Qiwei wasn't even going to make contact. He disdainfully turned aside. Yun Yi automatically turned in that direction as well. He wondered what a 9th grade beast could be interested in there. Mu Qinglan saw them both looking at her and was very surprised. She couldn't understand the reason for their interest. The young man frowned. He realized that Mu Linghan was making an attempt to get a strong beast under his control. Yun Yi indignantly started shouting indignantly that the guy wouldn't dare to take possession of the beast. Unfortunately, he didn't have time to finish his sentence. A huge jet of flame almost knocked the guy off his feet. It was only because of his innate instinct that he jumped aside. Mu Qinglan was no less surprised. A huge space was bearing down on her. It was too late to run away anywhere. Zhu Qiwei herself turned into a flaming stream. All of her power very quickly penetrated into the girl through her forehead. The warrior froze in amazement. Getting energy from the flame bird was a very painful process. For a while, the girl managed to overpower the pain, and she watched in amazement as the bird empowered her. When it was over, Mu Qinglan started rubbing her forehead, trying to take away the hellish pain that came from the energy transfer. Finally, the strength left the girl's body. She fell to the ground exhausted and could not get up, her body shaking. Yun Yi immediately ran up to the young man and worriedly called Mu Linghan by name. He was no longer angry at his companion. The guy knew that Zhu Qiwei was only using his interlocutor's body to become stronger. He would get rid of him later. If you try to exercise the flame bird right now, it can lead to certain complications. Yun Yi sighed heavily and decided to repay the debt by saving the guy. He channeled his energy into the ground, and it reached the girl's face. At this moment, Mu Qinglan felt the energy that was foreign to her begin to leave her body, and she opened her eyes in surprise. At this moment, she was in a serene and endless blue space. Next to her was only the spirit of the jade board. Suddenly something changed. The girl felt an unusually bright and strong light illuminating her beautiful face. Mu Qinglan looked up and saw a strange surge of pure energy. She realized that Yun Yi was trying to save her. The young man's energy enveloped her more and more tightly. The girl had to admit that she could hardly subdue a strong beast. She felt ashamed of her powerlessness. The pretty girl blushed because of embarrassment and decided that it wouldn't work. She would have to give Zhu Qiwei away. The spirit of the plaque formed a red pentagram in space and sat at ease in the very center. He told the girl that he would not let her die. The spirit fell downwards. Zhu Qiwei rushed after him, not even realizing that he was simply trapped. Meanwhile, Yunyi tried unsuccessfully to awaken Mu Linghan. His life force had even dropped below the first step. Suddenly he saw that the exhausted guy slowly lifted himself from the ground to his knees. His whole body was trembling. It was worth the incredible effort. Linghan raised his head with his eyes closed, as if he was meditating. He was enveloped by streams of red-colored energy. Yunyi found that his energy had no effect on the boy. It was as if he had managed to get rid of his life force. At that time the pentagram played the role of a snare. The unsuspecting bird rushed down, but the pentacle turned into a snare. The flame bird felt too late that strong fetters had pulled down her wings and tail. It was hard for her to even move. The more Zhu Qiwei tried to break free, the more the ropes squeezed his body. He realized that there was nothing he could do. Mu Qinglan's pupils turned into bottomless pentagrams at this time. She commanded the bird to obey if it valued its life. Even the rolled-up Zhu Qiwei didn't want to submit, and declared that the little man hadn't even reached the degree of Yuanzhe. The spirit laughed. He stated that the bird acts like his ancestors. Couldn't win with his own strength, but he considers himself unrivaled. Zhu Qiwei turned his head toward the offending man and angrily asked who he was to even behave like this to him. The ghost told the girl that the bird was not going to bow, so it was necessary to guide him to the right path. The firebird was desperately trying to get free and shrieking indignantly. The spirit had done a good job of keeping the captive securely bound. Zhu Qiwei realized that he wouldn't succeed, and nervously shouted to Mu Qinglan that he had changed his mind and wanted to make a contract with her. The warrioress crouched down in front of the prisoner and frowned, wondering why he thought she wanted to make a contract with him. The girl grew demon horns. She demanded to obey her immediately. All orders must be obeyed immediately. The bird became enraged. The beast shouted that the great and unrivaled Zhu Qiwei would never become someone's slave. Mu Qinglan smirked gloatingly and revealed that she had a sharp knife for fish and meat. She wouldn't call herself very patient. The fire beast immediately evaluated the prospect. Such a future was not very attractive. Zhu Qiwei squealed that he agreed. His tears flowed in rivers, but there was no other way out. Anyone in his place would have done the same. The girl smiled and held out her hand to her captive. She said dismissively that no one had prevented the bird from surrendering from the beginning. The spirit sadly said that the matter was done. Mu Qinglan didn't even ask if he liked his neighbor. The girl smiled and explained that the ghost was in a good mood, so everything was okay then. The spirit wondered how she could know that. The warrior explained that all this time he had only been waiting for the jade tablet to merge with her, so he was glad. The spirit acknowledged that she was quite a clue. He revealed that the girl's vital veins were now tempered by the jade board and fire. Subsequently, she would gain an advantage in cultivation. Mu Qinglan became herself again. She decided that she would start the path to power gradually. She would first become stronger. The girl thought about everything that had happened recently. Taming Zhu Qiwei was a bit unfamiliar to her. Yunyi sat next to Mu Qinglan. From the outside, it might have looked like he was looking in front of him, but his companion knew that this was not the case. When she caught his mysterious gaze, the beauty turned pale. She realized that the young man had obviously noticed something and knew about her power. For a few seconds, Qinglan even felt like he knew absolutely everything about how he and the spirit tamed the firebird. The guy frowned, wondering how Mu Linghan was going to use what he had stolen from right under his nose. The young man smiled in return and replied that he had made a contract with Zhu Qiwei, so the bird could only be retrieved through his corpse. The girl stretched her hands forward in embarrassment and offered another option. She would go with the young man. Yunyi glanced glumly at Mu Linghan's hands. The young man stretched his hands forward so defenselessly that it disarmed his interlocutor. The man hesitated for a moment, but after a few seconds he touched his companion's arm lightly. Mu Linghan wailed that he couldn't go with Yunyi right now, need to finish the family trial. Both of them blushed. The young man took a quick step towards the fire lioness, explaining that the 3 days allotted for the trial had already passed. He had to hurry. Mu Qinglan bent down and picked up 2 dark brown yuan pills. Yunyi watched her carefully. Linghan turned around and showed the young man 2 eloquent proofs of the fire beast's death. With this, he would take first place. The guy was perplexed, wondering if there was any point in some sort of test for someone who had almost become the first in the Zhongyuan secret realm. The young man turned his head and smiled. He replied that he always liked to take first place in any competition. The guy added that he's always been more interested in the exact people who need something from him. Mu Linghan asked Yunyi to give him some time to deal with the trial, and then they would discuss the matter of Zhu Qiwei. The young man looked intently at his interlocutor. He didn't see much difference in taking the fire beast, so he agreed. Meanwhile, at the Mu residence, the patriarch gathered the people. 18 people had not returned from the ordeal. Mu Yan asked if there was any more information. The man replied that 5 of the missing people had never been found. The patriarch frowned at his interlocutor. Mu Yan squinted his eyes and asked what kind of people he was talking about. It turned out that they had all entered the 9-slope mountains with Mu Ye. But the young man had somehow returned alone. Mu Ye turned pale. He heard the conversation and realized that he would be questioned. He hoped that Mu Linghan had died in the forest. The patriarch actually asked the guy this question. He found it suspicious that only the leader had managed to survive. Mu Ye said that at the beginning of the ordeal, they encountered a white tiger decorated with a brown pattern. Mu Yan puzzledly said that such animals were very rare in that place, and asked how they managed to disturb the beasts. The young man proudly displayed his scar from shoulder to waist, and declared that this wound would serve as the best proof. Mu Ye said that he had managed to wound one tiger. Mu Linghan finished him off and summoned the rest of the white tigers. The young man's lies grew more and more passionate. Tears came to his eyes when he said that Linghan had attacked his subordinates and thrown them to the tigers. Mu Ye roared truthfully and narrated that he had tried to save his subordinates, but had narrowly escaped death himself. He fell on his knees before the patriarch and pleaded guilty to the loss of the troop. The young man agreed to the punishment. In fact, Mu Ye only cared about one thing, whether the patriarch would believe him or not. But no one would definitely believe that the tigers had been summoned by Linghan. Suddenly, loud applause erupted. The audience parted in front of Mu Linghan, who was clapping. The guy said that he almost believed his tales himself. Mu Ye turned back around with fear. It really was that worthless guy. It was unbelievable, but he had managed to survive. Stammering, the young man asked how Mu Linghan had managed to survive the ordeal in that forest teeming with wild beasts. The boy looked meaningfully at his opponent, and in turn asked him why he was so surprised. Patriarch Mu Yan asked Linghan if he had anything to refute all the things Mu Ye had said. The guy retorted by asking him what there was to refute, and hadn't he just told everything he himself had done? Angry Mu Ye said that he had a good relationship with everyone, and it was all down to Linhai, a handicapped person who was willing to go to any lengths. He loudly declared that he was asking the patriarch to judge them. Mu Yan looked at him with a serious gaze and remained silent. Linghan told the patriarch that he is disabled and his first reaction when he meets a tiger is to run away. How would he be able to rush into battle and kill it? He asked in a calm tone, "Is a disabled person like him capable of such a thing?" Mu Yan asked Mu Ye what did he think about it. The guy angrily told the patriarch that those white tigers were led by Mu Linghan personally. Mu Yan, on the other hand, replied to him that Linghan was not even a Yuanzhe, so he could not have baited the white tigers. He asked Ye to choose his words. The patriarch said the evidence in the case was insufficient, so it would be considered later. He suggested that the evaluation of the trial should begin. It was said that the one who obtained the highest number of yuan pills or the highest level pill would become the winner of the trial. It was also said that all those with second-class pills should step forward. Roll call was called. The step was taken by Mu Zhongbei, who has 1 second-grade pill, Mu Ying with 2 second-grade pills, and Mu Sanke with 3 second-grade and 1 third-grade pill. The patriarch Mu Yan asked Mu Ye and Mu Linghan where their yuan pills were. They answered him nothing. Ye said that the disciple was devoid of talent, so he only received 1 second-grade peak stage pill that he got from the white tiger. One of the contestants looked at him unhappily and said that he seemed to have the first place in his pocket. The girl standing next to him agreed with her. The patriarch asked Mu Linghan where was his pill. The fellow answered him that he didn't have a second-class yuan pill. Yemu scoffed at him and said that as expected from a scum, not even a second-grade yuan pill could he get his hands on. But unexpectedly, Linghan closed his mouth. He said that he had a 6th-grade yuan lioness yuan fire spirit pill. All the people nearby were stunned, including Mu Ye, who gawked his eyes and stared at the pill in astonishment. Linghan said he was hiding in a cave after running away from a pack of tigers, and he couldn't even imagine that there would be a dead lioness yuan inside. Yemu laughed and said that he was lying since there was not a single person in Elk City who could kill a 6th-grade fire spirit lioness. He said that even if he was lucky enough to meet the dead yuan lioness, why did no one before him take her yuan pill and leave it there? Unexpectedly, Yun Yi intervened in the conversation and stood in front of the others. He condescendingly said that he didn't need such a thing. Mu Linghan was surprised by his appearance and wondered why he was here. Yun Yi told him that he might as well be ashamed. Linghan, at the same moment, began to sweat from discomfort and nerves. Mu Ye started pointing his finger and shouting, "Who was he, and how dare he barge into Mu Mansion and say whatever he wanted?" Linghan hid behind Yun Yi and said to himself that he would hold a candle to Ye, since even he didn't dare to speak in such a tone with Yun. The cold-blooded man replied to him that he should be glad he wasn't interested in killing him, as he didn't want to get his hands dirty. Mu Ye was furious. He glared at him with anger in his eyes and asked what the hell was he talking about. He was ready to fight. Mu Ye didn't think for long, much less hold his temper. He immediately threw a punch. Everyone in the neighborhood began to scream in fear and scattered in all directions. Yun-Yi stood still in cold blood. He watched the actions of the foolish Mu-Ye, preparing to retaliate with a punch at any moment. Patriarch Mu-Yan looked at the cold-blooded young man and said to himself that he was much stronger than him. The patriarch turned to Yun-Yi, said that he had just been insulted, and asked him to be lenient, and not ruin this youngster's life. Yun told him that the 6th grade Yuan pill meant nothing to him, but it should be enough to rank first. Mu Linghan walked over to Yun-Yi and lightly tugged on his shirt as if intending to say something. He looked him in the eye and said that he would sort out his own problems. Yun-Yi said he had time, but he didn't. Patriarch Mu-Yan said that the young hero was right, and Mu Linghan was worthy of taking first place in the trial. The wounded Mu-Ye said that there was nothing cool about using the strength of outsiders and wouldn't recognize his first place. The people agreed with him. Evil Ye also asked Linghan if he would agree to fight on the training ground in 3 days since he was so brave. Yun told Linghan that Mu-Ye's life force was higher than his, and if he agreed, no one would interfere, and he would have to rely on himself. Linghan looked into his eyes and asked if he was worried about him since he was giving advice. Yun-Yi replied to him that if Linghan went to the other world, Mu Qinglan would not let him sleep peacefully while in the afterlife. Mu Linghan confidently replied that he might as well not even worry about all of this. He was confident in himself. He stated that it was time to collect absolutely all debts and pay for what he had done. He stood confidently on his feet. Mu Linghan loudly declared to Mu Ye that he was willing to accept his challenge and fight one-on-one. He also added that if not happy with his first place in the trial, they should go and bring a pill yuan above 6th grade. People in the crowd got nervous and called him a mean boy for who could bring a pillory above the 6th grade. Yun-Yi told Linghan that he had to go away for a few days and he would come back soon to pick him up. As he was about to leave, the guy stopped him, shouting that he hadn't answered anything yet. Patriarch Mu-Yan asked him if he was related to that person in any way. Linghan replied that it was just his debtor. He also asked the patriarch if he could give him an award for achieving first place. Patriarch Mu-Yan and the young man Mu Linghan stood in front of the entrance of the huge library. It was as if it reeked of an atmosphere of enlightenment. Yan told the young man that he would only have one incense stick, and if he didn't choose a technique when the time expired, he would be thrown out of the library. The patriarch said to himself that the young man was talking about the main branch library. Linghan entered the building. Mu-Yan said to himself that such a dazzling genius has to strive for the first place just to get one volume of techniques. Shueyu asked Linghan, "Is it really worth wasting time on techniques of this level?" Linghan asked him, meaning to say he could give him something better than this. But Yu asked him in return, what good could he offer if all that was left of him was his soul? Linghan finally arrived at the right place and spotted a greenish-colored glass thing on the shelf. He told himself that as soon as his hand touched her, his life force reacted immediately. He hesitated and said mockingly to himself, "Is this really the volume of a damaged arcane spell?" He said that an incomplete medium spell already had a medium rank, and if he could gather it completely, it could entail a serious benefit. Linghan said, taking it with him. Zhue said he has detrimental insight, and if he gathers it completely, maybe it will go up. It was as if Linghan felt a little lighter on his soul. He smiled and looked at the spell with bottomless and sincere eyes. After a while, he was already in Mu Linghan's mansion. The weather outside was sunny. A young man was sitting in one of the rooms on the floor. He was in a meditation posture and was studying a spell. He said that the green energy slaughter gathers life force and turns it into a blade, shattering jade and cutting gold. Linghan also said that even if it was a secret spell, it couldn't be that strong, but he should still cultivate first. The young man picked up the jade board and began the cultivation process. He was cold-blooded. The wind rose because of the cultivation process. The leaves of the trees swayed because of it. Linghan said to himself that the jade tablet had absorbed a huge amount of life force in an instant. He still sat with closed eyes and a serious face, continuing to cultivate over the jade tablet. Shueyu told Linghan that it was a yuan pill. He added that it had finally become a yuanji. Linghan was shocked by all of this. She was surprised, and at the same time very happy. She told herself that it had been a long time since she had felt such power. She felt a calmness of mind. The spirit told her that enough unnecessary words, and asked her to try out the first-level green energy slaughter technique. Linghan began to cultivate on the yuan pill. She agreed with the spirit's assertions. The girl used a level 1 green energy slaughter technique. She delivered a sharp strike. Linghan declared that the spiritual power concentrated in the pill, forming a slaughter of green energy, creating a sharp blade capable of cutting through steel. Suddenly her eyes went wide with astonishment. She saw something mesmerizing. In front of her was a blade of indescribable sharpness that was capable of cutting even steel. Linghan was amazed at such a sharp blade. She had never seen anything like this before. She began to look at him with a smile and joy, saying that he looked like a real treasure. The heroine continued to cultivate sitting in a meditative pose on a hard wooden chair. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. Her gaze was serious and stern, as if something had agitated her. She was determined to take possession of the sharpest blade. She swung her hand sharply to grab it. Linghan deftly grabbed the sharp blade. A moment later, she was already rejoicing in her small victory. The girl immediately began waving it from side to side to try it out in action. The blade was extremely sharp, and overall it was unrivaled. Its blows were mesmerizing. The girl told herself with a smile that since she was allowed to come in here again later, she would be sure to take what was hers. 3 days passed like a blink of an eye. The rivals were about to begin their battle on the training ground. The people in the crowd wondered if the energy emanating from Mu Ye had become stronger, and he had broken through again. Mu Ye said to himself that he had already consumed the white tiger pill, and this time he would snap Mu Linghan's head with his own hands. People wondered if it was because Linghan hadn't shown up yet that he was afraid. Many people called him a coward and said that it was better for him to die. Mu Ye asked the elder if he could go in search of the enemy himself, since he still didn't dare to come. But suddenly Linghan appeared, who coldly asked him, was he really in such a hurry to die? Mu Ye replied to him with a sly smile that he already thought he was too scared to show up. Linghan said that he doesn't get the opportunity to beat him up in public very often, so why would he miss it? These words infuriated the young man Mu Ye. His mind felt as if he was seized with anger, and he did not know what to say to his rival. He glared angrily at his opponent and asked him to stop talking nonsense, and suggested that the battle should finally begin. Linghan sternly glanced at him and said that he was coming out and didn't have any last words. In that case, it was time to start. Mu Ye smiled insidiously at his opponent. He began to run with his fist prepared for his opponent, and said that he would help him die. The audience was delighted with Mui. One of the girls said that Mu Linghan was not so easy to hurt or kill. Linghan, on the other hand, tried to stay cool and calm. At the moment when his opponent was about to strike, he thought of something. At the last moment, before getting hit, he literally went wild and made a sharp movement with his hand. When his opponent's fist was at his eye, Linghan deftly intercepted his opponent's hand and stopped the punching power. Mu Ye began to panic and wondered, how did the opponent manage to catch his fist so deftly? Linghan grabbed his opponent's other hand and began to hold both hands tightly already. Mu Ye tried to break free. He began to shout for his opponent not to dare hold him down, and he let go of his hands now. But Linghan still kept his cool and was completely calm. He didn't care about his words. He fumbled for one of the points on his opponent's arm and pressed it as hard as he could. The force of the squeeze was indescribable. Mu Ye couldn't resist him, and at first he didn't even realize what was happening to his hand. Moments later, the young man screamed in pain. The pain was inexplicably intense. There was a lot of blood around Mui. He had lost a lot of blood after being stabbed in the arm. Linghan stood in front of his opponent and still held his composure, remaining calm. Blood was gushing from Mu Ye's hand. He almost couldn't move his wounded arm. There was a red mark on it. He decided to take the knife out of his pocket. Mu Ye threw the knife towards Linghan, shouting that he would definitely kill him. The anger in his eyes could not be taken up literally. Linghan remained calm and looked into his opponent's eyes with a serious gaze. He saw his dastardly deed. Meanwhile, people had gathered in the living room of the Mu family's mansion. The weather was sunny. The patriarch Mu Yan and the lowborn woman, did Mu Linghan really win the battle? He was stunned and wondered if he had really recovered. Yan asked the woman if he had used Yuanzhe's power. The woman condescendingly replied to him that Mu Linghan had not shown such strength, and besides, the woman sitting in the chair asked, what did she mean when she said to the same thing? The elderly woman replied that in addition, Linghan had his own opinion about the situation, and in this battle he had completely crushed Mu Ye. She finished her short account of all this, concluding with the phrase that this was the situation. Mu Linghan smiled at his enemy's face and said that he did not hesitate to use concealed weapons to fight him. The knife that Mu Ye threw at him was indescribably deft and stopped in flight with a sharp movement. The indestructible agile Linghan intercepted the sharp blade in flight with 2 fingers. He was cold-blooded. Such a despicable and dishonest act. Linghan decided not to forgive his opponent and began to run at him. He swooped down on his opponent with a crushing kick with both feet on his torso. Mu Ye did not expect this and began to fall down rapidly. A moment later, the powerless and weak young man Yi was lying on the asphalt. His whole body rolled on the asphalt. The young man was lying bloody. Around him was a pool of his own blood. He lay silently bleeding. Mu Linghan picked up the knife that the opponent had thrown at him and said with a smile on his face that it wasn't a bad gift. But suddenly, he loudly said that he was returning the opponent's property and threw it straight at Mu Ye's chest. The young man was still bleeding rapidly. The blood had almost completely covered his face and he only moaned in pain. Linghan looked at him slightly anxiously and wondered, did the knife really turn out to be poisoned? He approached his dying opponent and said with a smile that he had pierced his right breast and he would not die immediately, so he could savor the poison. He also added that the internal organs have been torn to shreds and blood vessels have been destroyed, so the only thing left to do is to die. Mu Ye was powerless, and the fear of losing his life was added to it. After hearing this, he started to cry, but he was still unable to speak. A crowd of onlookers watched what was happening. All those present could not utter a single word. Mu Linghan coldly watched his opponent bleeding out as he lived out his last moments of life. His long hair was blown by the wind, and he was standing beside the bloody body of his opponent Mu Ye. The exasperated girl said that he was just as cruel as the main branch of the clan said he was. The guy told her that Mu Ye originally had devious plans and wanted to send Linghan away, so it was his own fault for what happened at the end. Mu Yan said that there was no need to spread about it, and the most important thing right now was the martial arts gathering that would be held in a month. He asked to select a few of this year's talents. After all, they must not shame Mu's face, or else their position in the mansion would be precarious. One of the women told the patriarch that time was running out, and it was worth recalling Mu Liuer and the others to be on full alert. Patriarch Mu Yan looked at the woman with his bottomless blue eyes and said that he agreed with her. Meanwhile, somewhere in the demon palace, the location of which is unknown, the chief demon came to break the news. The majestic demon sat on his throne and tried to enjoy the calm. He asked the servants what was the matter. The servant told the demon that one of the subordinates was secretly following Mu Linghan. He added that as it turns out, this young man is not as much of a loser as they previously thought. The head demon smiled slightly and asked, "So he means to say that that thing preferred Mu Linghan as its master?" The nervous servant told His Majesty that the subordinate found no trace of the black jade tablet on him. He shouted in panic that the subordinate would admit his mistake and wanted to apologize. But the demon's blade went through him. The servant's head was separated from his torso. His bloody body was lying on the floor. The cold-blooded demon boss called him useless, saying that he couldn't even manage such a trifle. It was Emperor Qianjue, the head of the Dark Demon sect. He said Mu Linghan's name out loud and smiled as if he was planning something. Shui Yu asked the little girl where she was going. Linghan told him that she had advanced to Yuanzhe in one night, albeit with the help of that tablet. But she added that, however, it is still better to stabilize her current condition. She said that the important thing now is to absorb the rest of the power in the body. She added that it was the only house in Losi, and there might be rare things there. Before entering the house, the girl was stopped by two men. They asked her to stand still. Linghan said he would like to put something up for auction and asked if they could help him with an appraisal. The young man replied to him that not everyone is eligible to enter their auction house, just as not everything can be bid on. Linghan condescendingly looked at the young man, and in a calm tone, he asked if he had the right to do so with the fire spirit Yuan crystal. Both men guarding the entrance to the auction house were shocked by what they heard. They kindly opened the door and politely told the honored visitor that he could safely enter. In the hall where the auction was taking place, people wearing the same robes as Linghan were seated. It was quiet all around. He saw the patriarch of the Mu family, Mu Yan, the senior young master of the Jiang family, Jiang Xuan, and the second miss of the Ye family, Ye Yuzhou. Linghan sat on the chair and wondered what would be auctioned off that the big shots of the city's great clans had come here. Jiang Xuan asked Ye Yuzhou, did she really have her eye on some item since she so rarely leaves the house? Yi replied that she was about to make another breakthrough soon, so she came to see if she could find something to supplement the life force. Xuan said that she could take it easy, and if she liked something, this young master would provide it for her. There was an old man sitting on the podium. It was the auctioneer Xiazhang. People admired him and shouted that he was the best of the best auctioneer of the Xiashang house. The old man with a smile told the people present that he was the auctioneer of this auction. He said that today's first lot is the 7-star sword of the ancient temple. It is extremely strong and sharp, and the starting price is 5,000 gold. Those present from the hall immediately began to fight over the sword, throwing sums of money around. The sum reached 6,000 gold pieces. Linghan felt like crying. She told herself that she was so poor compared to them that she didn't even have 100 gold pieces. Xiazhang said that the second lot is a second-grade peak stage Wan pill, and the starting price of it is 20,000 gold. Mu Linghan was stunned by the amount. Someone in the audience shouted out that they were willing to give 30,000 gold pieces, which shocked her even more. The final sum was named by Jiang Xuan. He stated that he was willing to give 50,000 gold pieces for this pill yuan. Old man Zhang said that if no one raises the price, this pill yuan will go to young master Zhang. Xuan told Yuzhou that she could see her as part of his sincere intentions. The girl called him brainless to herself. The auctioneer stated that there were 2 lots left, and both items are treasures that were graded by them as ultra-perfect. The penultimate lot was a fallen celestial star with a starting price of 1 million gold pieces. The fallen star is an artifact that can be used both offensively and to repair wounds, and you can't find it on the market. The old man said that this fallen star is defective because of old age, but it can still show its strength, so it's safe to bet. Linghan didn't expect to see a fallen star with 3 stars. and although her level was low right now, but this fallen star would definitely be of use to her. The betting continued. Huge sums were ready to be given by Zhang Xuan and Patriarch Mu Yan, who named a price of 1,100,000 gold pieces. Mu Linghan looked at the long-haired man who made the bet and realized that it was Mu Yan. Zhang Xuan nervously, and with a little anger, said that he was willing to pay 1,200,000. The Patriarch said to himself, Mu Mansion hadn't had any young talents for several years, and with this fallen star, they would be able to reassure themselves. Xuan asked Yan if Mu Mansion was determined to snatch the star from his family's hands. Yan replied that the treasure would go to the worthy. The young man said that Patriarch Mu was right, but no one had ever been able to take away what the Jiang family liked. He named the sum of 2.5 million gold pieces, and said to himself that Mu's family were weaklings who couldn't claim a fallen star. Such a statement embarrassed Patriarch Mu. The whole thing made him a little angry, but he continued to keep his cool and remained silent. Everyone in the auction room looked amongst themselves, and there was a temporary silence. Jun asked if anyone wanted to raise the bet. There was a loud shout with the words, 2,500,001 gold. The price of a fallen star was interrupted by the unremarkable-looking man in a black robe that was Ling'an. The angry Jiang Xuan turned around and loudly announced that his price was 2,550,000 gold. The man in the black robe said in a calm tone that he was willing to give 2,550,001 gold pieces. Xuan laughed hysterically and asked angrily, "Does this person dare to steal from the Jiang family?" Ling'an said that according to the rules, the one who offered the higher amount is the winner. Moreover, the fallen star does not belong to the Jiang family. The enraged Yuan shouted that he wanted to see how he would continue to confront him. He named a sum of 2,700,000 gold. He was approached by a young man who whispered that the gentleman asked him to tell him that 2.5 million was the limit. He wouldn't get more. But the young master asked him to shut his mouth while saying that he always gets what he wants. But the young man said that he couldn't ignore the Patriarch's words. Besides, even if he got the treasure, would he be able to keep it? Xuan sat down on the chair, and after slightly calming down, he grudgingly replied that so-and-so wouldn't mess with him. The cold-blooded man in the black robe asked provocatively, "Why the pathos if there was no money?" Xuan became angry. The auctioneer asked if anyone wished to bid more than 2,771 gold pieces. The others were silent, as if speechless. There was complete silence. Auctioneer Jun stated that in that case, the fallen star would be given to the young master and asked everyone to congratulate him. Xue Yu at Linghan. Why would you raise the rate if she didn't have any money? He said that he would like to see her when he had to pay her back. Linghan was calm and said to herself that she would naturally make someone present pay for her. Jun said that if anyone was unsatisfied with the past treasure, the last lot will definitely not disappoint anyone. He said that it was a yuan crystal produced by the fire spirit lioness during childbirth, and its price was 1.5 million gold. Xuan said that this yuan crystal had the purest energy, and no wonder they had presented the fallen star at the auction before. Yuzhou told herself that since she was going to break through to the peak of the Chuyuan realm, the fire spirit crystal would be a good support. Xuan gave a sly glance and said that since he didn't get the fallen star, he would definitely take the fire spirit yuan crystal. When he stood up and shouted that he was willing to give 2.5 million for him, Linghan declared that he would give 3 million gold pieces. Zhang angrily asked who he was and how dare he steal things from him. Yuzhou was surprised after all, this person was willing to give such money. The cold-blooded Mu told Xuan that if he didn't have any money, he shouldn't have come. Why play the rich man act? The young master angrily declared that he had money and was willing to give 3.5 million gold pieces. He turned around to the young man who was stopping him and declared that he would get this crystal today, and whoever interfered with him would forfeit his life. He turned to the man in the robe and asked if he had enough money to raise the bet. Linghan said that he was willing to put 1 million gold pieces on top of the young master's offer, so as not to appear shabby. The auctioneer said that this young gentleman had offered 4.5 million. He asked if anyone would give more. Yuzhou said to herself that the price had already exceeded the cost price of the crystal, and there was no need for her to bid. However, she realized that if it was Zhang Xuan, there was a chance that he would lend her some. She excitedly told him that this fire spirit yuan crystal was good, but the price was exorbitant, so it was better to give it to someone else. Xuan said that he couldn't let her see himself from the loser's side, so he must get his hands on the beast soul crystal. An exasperated Jiang got off his chair and loudly declared that he was willing to give 5 million gold for the crystal. The others present at the auction were nervous and turned to look at the man in the robe. Ling'an coldly said that Senior Young Master Jiang was indeed a spender, but did not shame himself in front of him. Xuan nervously asked him, could he really not provide anything more than 4.5 million gold? Ling'an smiled and said that he couldn't even afford 450 gold, let alone 4.5 million. He said that the young master was joking, and not to mention 4.5 million. Even 450 gold was an insurmountable amount for him. Jiang Xuan's mouth felt as if blood was pouring out of his mouth from rage and anger. His heart and mind were filled with anger at what he heard. He angrily began to shout at the young master and asked how dare he deceive him. But his servant stopped him. Auctioneer Zhang asked, "Is Senior Young Master Zhang really going to pull something like this in front of the old man?" Xuan told himself that if this ruined Xiashang auction house's reputation, the Jiang family would have to be held responsible for these atrocities. Old man Zhun smilingly told the dear guest to follow him to retrieve his lot. Mu Linghan followed the old auctioneer. Jiang Xuan watched them follow. He managed to calm down. A few hours ago, Xiazhong had told Linghan that he had heard that he wanted to auction the Yuan crystal fire spirit beast. The old man took the crystal from the man's hands and began to examine it. He said that it was indeed a Yuan crystal of a fire spirit beast. He was surprised and said to himself that there were only a handful of people in the entire empire capable of dealing with a beast of such strength. The old man told the man that he would be the guest of honor of their Xiashan auction house, and she would definitely get him a great price. The stealthy man in the black robe thanked the old auctioneer for his courtesy and assistance. Xiazhong said to himself that he was afraid that Jiang Xuan would not let go of this young master so easily. The young master sent his subordinate to go and find out who this person really was. Xuan stood outside with a straw in his teeth. He was pondering with a serious face. It was an autumn day and leaves were falling from the trees. The subordinate told the young master that the identity of this man was unknown, and he feared he was not from Elk at all. Xuan smiled slyly, and said that in that case, even if he killed him, no one would stand up for him. Linghan said that she had even gotten 500,000 added on, and now she was left with about 1,800,000 gold. The spirit told her that the result was a purple and gold card and a mustard seed bracelet, so she wasn't at a loss. Linghan said to herself that with her brother, they used to have black gold cards before, but this is much more convenient. She doesn't even have a place to store things here. 2 auction house guards were watching her from the balcony. They were a little confused. She seemed strange to them. Linghan didn't turn around but smiled caustically, for she realized that she had a trump card up her sleeve. She didn't hesitate and immediately started running faster and faster. Her heels seemed to glisten with speed. After a while, Linghan had already reached a dense forest thicket where it seemed that no one could meet her. She said it's just a great place to kill and hide bodies. She turned around and wondered if the 3 men standing right behind her back thought so. Jiang Xuan looked at him menacingly and said that he was a daredevil. Since he had wandered into the 9-slope mountain alone, did he really choose a place to die? Linghan said to herself that if this had happened in the capital of the empire, Xuan would have already died several times over. Jiang told himself that 5 million was no joke, and even if his father protected him, the elders would not forgive him. He asked to give up the fallen star. The man in the robe said that he had the money for the fallen star, thanks to young Master Jiang's generous donation. Sweat was dripping down Xuan's face from anger. He asked, did he really mean to say that that fire spirit Yuan crystal belonged to him? At the same minute, the young master was blown off his tower. He screamed that he was going to kill him. He and his bodyguards immediately rushed at him. Linghan said that if anything, he was using them to test out a new technique. He immediately used the green energy slaughter. The 2 bodyguards were injured and knocked down, and Jiang Xuan realized that this person was only Yuan Jie. He said to himself that he thought he would wield overwhelming power, but didn't realize he seemed weak inside. Jiang shouted at the top of his voice that some Yuanzi dared to show off his ponces in front of him and swoop down on him with his spear. But at the last moment before he died, Linghan deftly reacted and stopped his opponent's spear. He cast a cold-blooded glance at him and asked in a perfectly calm tone if what he was saying was true. The spear seemed to be cut through by the sharp blade of the man in the black robe. The enemy could not resist. Jiang Xuan became nervous and panicked as he couldn't understand how the opponent had done this. He used magic to at least try to push the enemy away and strike. His face was fierce, and his mind was filled with rage. The desire to destroy the enemy was unquenchable. But the man in the black robe professionally countered Jiang Xuan's enchanted sword. A moment later, he was looking at his broken sword frustratedly, not understanding how this could have happened. He could hardly hold back his tears and still didn't understand how this could all happen. The 2 bodyguards were wary. They panicked and turned to the young master to turn around. But the stalled young master stood still. But the man in the black robe did not slumber, and deftly approached the enemy. Linghan immediately got close to his opponent and firmly grasped his neck. Xuan panicked a lot, but tried to keep quiet. The man in the robe said that if they wanted their young master to forfeit his life, they could try to approach. He asked them to step back, and if they took a step forward, they might not blame him for being rude. The bodyguards shouted for him to stop. One of them asked nervously, what could they do to get him to let their young master go and let him live? Linghan replied that if they wanted the master to survive, they had to break their arms and legs within 3 seconds, or else he would break them to him. The 2 bodyguards were dumbfounded by this statement. They glanced at each other. The man in the black robe still held the young wizard's neck. and began to count from 1 to 3. 1 second later, one of young Master Zhang Xuan's arms was already broken, and he fell to the ground in agony. The bodyguard screamed in panic. Didn't he say he was giving them 3 seconds to do everything? Linghan coldly but seriously looked them in the eyes and said that they should be grateful to him for this. The nervous bodyguard said they would break their arms and legs, but in return asked them not to harm their young master. In a few seconds, the bones of the unfortunate bodyguards were broken. The crunch came from several meters away, both of them screaming in pain. Zhang Xuan, suffering from pain, stammered, and asked the man if he would let him go now that they had broken their arms and legs. Linghan calmly grabbed him by his shirt and started pulling him along. The young master didn't understand what was wrong. He asked in a panic, what was he up to? The man in the robe answered him that he wasn't going to get his hands dirty with murder. Linghan told the spirit that if she wanted to disappear without a trace, he would have to buy her some time. Bodyguards with broken bones agonized in pain and called out to their young master with shouts. Meanwhile, something incomprehensible was happening in Mukilan's room. It was the middle of the night. Linghan was fixing his hair standing in one corner of the room. There was nothing to portend trouble. But suddenly his peace was disturbed by an unknown man entering the room in the middle of the night. Linghan immediately became wary, as he wasn't expecting any guests, especially at this hour. It turned out to be Patriarch Mu Yan. The Patriarch was immediately asked why he was here, but he posed a counter-question to Linghan, asking if he was the mysterious man from the auction house. The boy asked, "What is he talking about? Yan said that someone was auctioning the crystal today, and no one but him could bring it there." Linghan asked, "Doesn't the Patriarch think that he would auction off the Yuan crystal, right?" He added that although he had gotten 2 Fire Spirit Yuan pills, he had never seen any Fire Spirit Yuan crystals. Linghan asked the Patriarch not to think about it too much, as that person would be displeased. Mu Yan wondered if the young man in white was the same person. He said to himself that everything was beginning to make sense. The Patriarch said that he had misunderstood everything. He asked Linghan who was that man anyway. The young man said that they had only met in the Zhuyuan secret realm, and he had helped him. Therefore, he and his sister had helped him in the secret realm. Patriarch Mu Yan listened to the young master's story, and said that he understood everything. He added that he had better go to bed early. As he left, he also told Linghan that Mu Mansion would always be on his defense. The young man looked after him. Seeing Patriarch Mu Yan off with a glance, Linghan smiled, for his words were promising. There was a conversation on the street. A man was saying that the other day, young Zhang wanted to forcefully take an item from someone, but his opponent had taught him a cruel lesson. Mu Liu'er replied to the man that Zhang Xuan had always been spoiled, and now he had gotten what he deserved. She said that the Zhang family has won first place in the assembly 2 years in a row, and if it takes first place again, the Mu family will be in dire straits. One of the young men said that they finally had a chance to go home after 2 years of training, so they should teach Zhang a lesson. Mu Liu'er told the girl standing next to her that she still hadn't seen Mu Ye's younger brother upon her return. The girl nervously replied that he was about to die. Mu's face immediately changed. Sweat was running down her face, and she herself was excited beyond belief. She asked the girl in a panic, "What is she talking about?" The furious girl decided to visit Mu Linghan's house to find out what was wrong. She nervously banged on the door and called out to him. She was enraged and started asking the guy what he had done. Anger overflowed her eyes. Linghan was calm, and looking at her, he said to himself that it looked like Liu'er had returned from Bailo Academy, for she was wearing her uniform. The girl didn't listen to him and continued to yell at him at the top of her voice. She asked how he could be so insolent and self-righteous. 2 of the girl's bodyguards were angry. One of them asked Sister Mu to let them teach the impudent man a lesson. Linghan was calm. He asked his older brothers and older sister what was the reason they had come to him, and although to teach him a lesson. Liu'er started yelling at him, saying that he and Mu Ye were related and he had done such a brutal thing to him. But Linghan asked in response, what else was he supposed to do if he challenged him to a duel himself? Liu replied that the outcome of the fight was a foregone conclusion, and he still wanted to kill him. Linghan replied that Ye wanted to poison him, so he took revenge on him. He asked them in a calm tone, did they come here without knowing anything and want to avenge Mu Ye? Liu'er said in anger that Ye couldn't even wound him, but was mortally wounded by him, and today she would teach him how to treat people. The girl swung at him and called him a rascal, but Linghan was nimble and dodged the blow. While the girl was stunned by this action, he had already fled towards the street exit. Liu didn't understand how he did it. The 2 young disciples shouted to Sister Liu'er that the opponent had fled. They pointed a finger at him. Linghan told her with a smile that she was indeed dazzlingly beautiful. But what a pity, she was not his type. But Sister Liu wasn't about to abandon her goals. She screamed at the top of her head that he was seeking death. She took a leap. When the angry girl was about to strike with her long whip, Linghan made a decision. A moment later, when the heavy blow had already been struck, the young man was no longer standing in that spot. Luer was greatly surprised at what was happening, and didn't understand at all. How could he have disappeared? Linghan furtively approached the charming girl from behind and asked in a whisper if he was the one she was looking for. He gripped her hand tightly with the hand she was holding the whip with, and told her that it really suited her. He called her a cruel heavenly treasure. At the same time, Luer felt the guy gently touch her body with his body. She immediately pushed him away and started yelling at him to stay away from her and called him a pervert. But unexpectedly, Yunyi appeared on the roof of the house, saying that he didn't know that by lowering himself to a loser, Linghan would become so lecherous. The young man immediately lowered Luer's hand. He was stunned by the lord's appearance. Yunyi looked at him with a serious and stern gaze and said that he was indeed a catcher. Linghan immediately pushed the girl away slightly and began to prove to the lord that he had misunderstood everything. Luer stepped a little to the side and stood unhappily. Her wrist was red after the young man let go of her. Yunyi examined the girl and said to himself that her wrist had turned very red. Apparently Linghan had squeezed it too tightly. Suddenly he found himself thinking about nothing. He asked himself why he was so angry, since the boy was nothing to him. Linghan said to Yunyi with a smile that a girl like her, he wouldn't even like her. Liu was angry. She interrupted him and started yelling in anger that he had gone too far and was out of line. The angered girl ran outside the grounds of Mu Mansion. The bodyguards followed her. She shouted after him that he would be sorry. Linghan coldly stared at her and didn't understand what was happening. He had a look of bewilderment on his face. The people on the training ground were cheering for Luer's return. They said that they would definitely win this time. The girl was angry and asked herself, what good was this beauty if Linghan ridiculed her? Liu continued to ponder and practiced her sword-striking technique at the same time. She said to herself that Mu Ye had indeed acted deceitfully, but there was no way she would admit to Linghan that she was wrong. The girl nervously continued to swing her sword, shouting that Linghan was a scoundrel and a scoundrel. The two youths with smiles on their faces loudly voiced that Luer's sister Luer had become stronger. Liu angrily asked, hasn't Linghan become a scum, so why does he dare to be so arrogant in the Mu family? The young man replied that Linghan had always been so arrogant and had no idea where he got such boldness from. He asked if he had offended her. Liu was embarrassed that they thought he was a loser after all. After exchanging a few moves with him, he wasn't even serious, so he wasn't that weak. Linghan asked Mr. Yunyi with surprise, what was the purpose of his visit? Yun asked him if he had forgotten that he had promised to give him something. A nervous Linghan replied that he had already concluded something with Zhu Qiwei. Yunyi asked if the young man thought that he wouldn't be able to figure out if they had made a contract or not. The gentleman lowered his gaze to the floor and in a calm tone and said that another method could be used, of course. Linghan confidently replied that one way or another, it belonged to him, and if he wanted to take it away, his life would have to be taken away as well. Yunyi said that he had saved him and thus repaid her favor. Linghan replied that he would not resist if he wanted to kill him. Yun told himself that taking Juqiwei by force would be difficult, but if not, Mu would not put down this trump card. He said that he was willing to exchange. Linghan said to herself that he had done a lot for her in the Zhongyuan realm, and now that she had changed gender, she still had to set conditions. She pondered and decided that it was better to exchange Juqiwei for treasures that she could use, since there was no contract. The enraged Zhu inside her mind started shouting for her to not even dare to exchange him for some treasure. She called him useless and asked if it would be better to trade him for treasure. He asked who she thought he was anyway. The girl replied to him that of course she was taking it for treasure, otherwise how would she get money for it? The spirit told the little girl to ignore him. Even if she begged him to leave now, he wouldn't. Linghan frustratedly lowered his head and said to Mr. Yunyi that he couldn't exchange everything after all. But suddenly, the Lord used some kind of spell. Something strange began to happen around him. Linghan was stunned by what was happening as she understood at all what was going to happen to her. Visually, a golden-colored magical hoop appeared around her. She became very nervous. When Linghan swung and threw a punch, Yunyi intercepted with a deft move to intercept his arm. He was cold-blooded and said to himself that Linghan's fist was very small. He thought it would be bigger. He lowered the young man's hand and said in a calm tone that his vital veins had recovered. The boy asked, so what if they had? He told Yunyi that he had chosen his own path and had gotten Juqiwei at the risk of his life, and if he wanted to take him back, he could try. But the gentleman answered him by calmly turning around and began to walk away from the mansion. Linghan asked Mr. Yunyi in surprise, did he really not need Juqiwei at all? The Lord turned and looked at the young man coldly and told him to take care of him himself. Yunyi started to walk away. Young Linghan didn't stop him. Their meeting was over. But suddenly, a man in a black robe appeared on the rooftop, who mockingly said that in that case, Juqiwei would take him away. Linghan was stunned by his appearance. Sweat began to run down his face. He didn't understand what was wrong. Linghan said to himself that the pressure was very strong. The man in the black robe continued to hold him back. The young man looked at his opponent sternly and asked loudly what kind of freak dared to attack him. The enemy took advantage of the gravity, and a moment later the young man was standing on the roof in front of him. She looked Linghan in the eyes and said that those who dared to look at him with such a look always ended up badly. But the young man was not going to surrender to some dastardly opponent at all. He decided to use a spell. The man in the black robe continued to hold him in one place. Linghan tried to use a spell. His opponent looked at him sternly and asked why he was doing this if he didn't want a bad end. Suddenly, Linghan shouted that he was using the green energy slaughter. The opponent didn't understand what he meant. The man in the robe decided that action had to be taken immediately before he could do him any harm. He deftly dodged Linghan's spell and gave him a direct blow in response to the spell. The young man began to fall rapidly down from the high roof. He panicked and started screaming at the top of his voice. At the last moment before shattering to pieces, Linghan's body was swallowed up. The young man's savior was Yunyi, who held him in his arms as if he were a child. Linghan started coughing up blood after a brief bout. He couldn't help but say something. Mr. Yun sat up and lightly embraced him. On his own, he was cold-blooded and tried to provide assistance. While supporting the young man with all his might, the assassin in the black robe was watching everything from the roof. Yunyi was enraged, and turning around to face the abyss demon, he told him that he was seeking death. Linghan said to himself that the Lord was obsessed with cleanliness, and if a demon dared to stain his clothes with his blood, Yun wouldn't let him off so easily. A moment later, the angry Lord Yi caused the energy of heaven and earth to riot. Everything around him glowed yellow. Mu Linghan was stunned, and wondered how strong he was since he was able to cause the energy of the heavens and earth to riot with a single movement. The demon said to himself, "Who would have thought that Yun Yi would be so angry? Did he really use the killing technique because of that young man?" The abyss demon immediately made the decision that before it was too late, he needed to flee from the scene. But when he almost jumped off the roof to escape, Mr. Yun Yi stopped it with his energy. The demon hovered in the sky, as if shackled by his master's spell. He didn't know what was happening to him. He became nervous and asked Mr. Yun Yi with anger, "Does he really want to kill him?" Yun calmly replied to him that he had waited a long time for them to appear so that he could capture them all afterwards. But today he must die. The pressure on the abyss demon was indescribably enormous. He began to scream in pain, and after a few seconds, he was torn apart. There was a lot of blood around. The master's subordinate ran up to him and knelt down, apologizing for his tardiness. Kneeling down, he looked around and was shocked by what he saw. He became very nervous after what he had seen. The subordinate asked the young master, "Didn't he say that it was better to wait until they all demons got together?" To which the young lord replied to him that he was ordering him to kill all members of the dark demon sect without mercy if he happened to meet them. The subordinate got up from his knees and told the lord that he would definitely do his bidding. He bowed to him as a sign of respect. Linghan was astonished and wondered just how strong Yun Yi was right now, and was the gap between them really similar to the difference between the earth and the heavens? She tried to be cold-blooded and looked at the floor with a blank stare. The young master didn't understand what was wrong with her. The subordinate pondered, how had Linghan been elected to the Zhongyuan secret realm with such strength and character? He told Yun Yi that the demons had decided to concentrate their forces to attack the young master. Yun replied that there was a purge that needed to be done. The young master was as cold-blooded as ever. After speaking to his subordinate, he looked into Linghan's eyes. Young Mu was uncomfortable and asked the gentleman how he could thank him, for if it had not been for him, there is no telling what would have happened to him. It was a new day, and therefore new adventures. It was early morning, and the bird was sitting on the branch of a blossoming tree. Mu Linghan walked out of the house into the courtyard. He had just woken up and was yawning and stretching. Opening the doors leading to the courtyard, he saw two individuals standing in the courtyard. It was Yun and his subordinate. A moment later, the doors were slammed shut with a sudden movement. They didn't realize what was happening. The subordinate asked Linghan, "Does he really want to shame the young master's face?" He added that he was the first to do such a thing. Yun Yi ordered a subordinate to spread rumors that he was here and bring in all the remaining members of the dark demon sect. Mu Linghan warily listened to their conversation while outside the door. He did not understand anything. The previous afternoon, the young man was sitting in the courtyard with Yun Yi. Suddenly, people came running and excitedly asked him if anything had happened to him. Two men saw a huge amount of blood in the yard, and began to ask what happened here. Was someone killed here? Mu replied that the patriarch and elders were not to worry. Someone wanted to kill him, but Yun Yi helped and dealt with him, and now everything is fine. Mu Yan said to himself that he might be fine, but for a corpse to be in such a state, isn't that an understatement? The patriarch said that Linghan had it easy, but wanted to know who the person was that wanted to take his life. The young man told Mr. Yun Yi that the city gate was already on fire. His face was covered in blood. The master had a calm tone and answered him that this was happening for the last time. Linghan looked at him with a fraction of surprise and decided to ask again, what did he mean by that? Mr. Yunyi stood in a robe stained with blood and looked into the young man's bottomless eyes. Linghan stared wide-eyed at the young master's eyes. It was as if their eye contact was unbreakable. Mu said that the trouble was not that great, and now that that person was killed by Yunyi, he had nothing to say. He patted the gentleman lightly on the shoulder, asking if he had nothing else to do. He said he dared not detain him any longer. Both of them turned their backs to each other. But Yunyi asked in a calm tone, who said he was going to leave? This made the young man a little angry. He replied that Yun should understand perfectly well that he was not going to play with his life. Young Master Yunyi looked at the floor with a stern gaze. He softly said that they would come again. In this connection, he stated that he would remain here for a while, so as not to endanger the young man. Linghan said to herself that she never thought that Yunyi would become her neighbor, and yet the patriarch and elders approved of it. She was displeased with all of this, and to top it all off, she added that Yan Mu had already become the leader in the Mu mansion. However, she realized that the upside of all this was that no one would dare to sneak in, and she was more comfortable with that. Linghan took the fallen star in her hands and clutched it tightly. Beautiful patterns could be seen on it. The girl didn't realize what was wrong at first, but after a moment the spell took effect. The spirit voice asked the little girl, for she did not know how the fallen star should be used, did she? He added that he thought she was a bright girl, and she didn't even know it. Linghan replied that he had better take care of himself. The spirit began to tell him that the role of a fallen star was more than just saving his life. The 3 stars on the fallen star aren't special, but there are rumors that the Star Ray Masters can enhance them so that they can control the dead. He also said that they can also move mountains and fill the seas with them, but no one knows exactly how great such power is. Linghan was delighted and asked the spirit admiringly, was he really a Star Ray Master in the past? The spirit told her to hold the fallen star in her hand and then begin to infuse the life force into the 3 stars. That way the soul would begin to accumulate. He added that her soul should now be inside a fallen star, and now she should try to feel how many of them she could feel. Linghan exalted herself and said that she could sense 3 stars. The spirit was stunned and told her to try calling them closer to her. The girl was as surprised as he was. He took his advice and asked where they were. After a moment, she exclaimed that the stars were on her hand. She was stunned. The spirit was dumbfounded and asked, "How is this possible?" The girl told the other that the winner of the martial arts gathering would be able to irrigate life force on a burst of heavenly energy. Mu Linghan, hearing their conversation, was surprised after all. A surge of heavenly energy is not simply given. The girl excitedly whispered to her friend that they say Linghan is related to a mysterious strongman, and even the patriarch is in awe of him. He walked up to the girl and asked her what was a burst of celestial energy. The girl tried to find the words to explain the essence to him. The girl said that every year, the life force of Mengji Mountain increases, and if he could sprinkle spiritual power on it, his level would increase. Linghan turned around and asked her with a smile, did such a beautiful place really exist? Liuer said that when the irrigation of the heavenly energy tide begins, only the winner who became the best would get the chance to evolve there. Linghan only smiled at her and said that it was still unknown whether it would work or not, but it was worth at least trying. He thanked her for her story. Liu immediately got angry and yelled at the young man, calling him shameless. The boy only smiled in response. But suddenly he confidently and loudly declared that Mr. Yunyi was on his side. Liu's subordinates looked at Sis in despair. Liuer shrieked and asked Linghan, what kind of person was he to rely on others for help? The girl was once again very angry, and their meeting was over. She started to walk away. Linghan wondered, was she really talking about Yunyi? He made no sign of it, and just laughed a little. The girl walked swiftly away. Finally, the long-awaited day of the martial arts assembly had arrived with trepidation. Preparations were underway. The patriarch of the Zhang family, Zhang Feng, asked the patriarch of the Mu Yan family, how was his situation? He answered him that the affairs of the Mu family were in order, and perhaps this year there would be a few who could join the main branch. Feng said that he wished his family members would at least be in the top 3. Yan wished for his child's recovery. Jiang got angry, but the patriarch of the Ye family, Ye Feiming, intervened and asked them not to argue. After all, the kids were already waiting. He also said that the surge of celestial energy would start soon, so they had better choose the participants soon. The patriarchs of the 3 influential families of the city stood in one place. They made decisions on the selection of the participants. It was announced that 10 people from each family will compete. The battles would be 3-on-3 with the winner advancing to the second round. The patriarchs of each family slipped a piece of paper into the box with the names of the participants written on it. A man announced in a loud voice that the martial arts meeting was starting right now. It was announced that Zhang Xin and his opponent Mu Linghan would compete on the first court. The audience wondered why the Mu family allowed a scum like Linhen to participate in a martial arts gathering. Zhang recognized the scum face of the Mu family's scum, and said that a chicken like him he could crush with one finger. Shin didn't think long, much less doubt his strength. He swung his finger at his opponent with a sharp movement, but suddenly, he and his opponent were separated by a barrier that stood in the way of his hand. He was surprised and didn't understand what was happening. Linghan didn't doze off, so he decided to seize the moment, and while his opponent was surprised, he grabbed his arm. He gripped his opponent's arm tightly. Shin began to ooze sweat because of his nerves. Mu Linghan pulled his opponent towards him with a sharp movement as he continued to squeeze his hand. A few seconds later, he delivered a stunning blow, breaking his opponent's bone in the process. Zhang Xin was sweating like he was a stream. His face was flushed red from the pain, and he could barely hold back a cry of pain. Linghan had no intention of stopping. He decided to finish off his already weakened opponent by kicking him directly in the torso. The scum of the family was far from weak. He stood firmly on his feet while his opponent rolled on the ground. Zhang Xin couldn't even move as he was weakened and badly injured in the fight. Linghan walked up to his weakened opponent and stepped his foot right on his arm. He said he could crush a chicken like him with one finger, right? After a few seconds, he stepped on one of Shin's toes and asked if that was the toe he was going to use to defeat him. Zhang Xin began to scream in pain with all his might. He sweatily said that he was admitting his defeat. Patriarch Zhang Fei declared at the top of his voice that Linghan was a vicious boy. He became very angry. Standing up from the table, the man shouted that this was a normal duel, and he had destroyed the arm of a member of his family, and he should be disqualified for that. But the patriarch sitting next to him, Mu Yan, looked at him angrily and told him not to overreact. He shouted that this was a martial arts gathering and victory depended on ability, and their Jiang family wasn't going to admit it. He also added that Zhang Xin intended to scratch out Linghan's eyes. In his opinion, he should have stood there and done nothing. Unexpectedly, Mu Linghan confidently got to his feet. His appearance was stern and very serious. All the spectators present were greatly surprised, for it reeked of austerity. No one knew what would happen next. He stated that since it is a duel, there should be a power differential between the winner and the loser, and the winner gets everything. He added that he had fought with the Su family's senior master in the capital, and even broke his leg, but the Su family knew the rules and never picked on him. A nervous Jiang Feng looked at the young man and said that he shouldn't have been so cruel. Angry Linghan replied to him that victory is victory and defeat is defeat. Can't the patriarch understand such a simple truth? The audience of the assembly was delighted with the young man's speech. They shouted that he was right, and they supported his advancement to the second round. Zhang Xin, still lying on the ground, stammered in pain and declared that he recognized defeat and surrendered. Linghan was declared the winner. He walked away from the dueling ground, and suddenly he saw Lu'er. She was looking at him innocently. The girl walked over to him, and looking down at the floor said that he wasn't as much of a scumbag as the rumors claimed. Linghan relaxedly asked her, "Doesn't she know that not all rumors are trustworthy?" Lu threatened him, saying that he had insulted Zhang Feng with his words, for which he would definitely want revenge. But the young man didn't care. He was as relaxed as before. He asked who old Feng thought he was. It was announced that Ye Yuzhou and Mu Lingyue would meet on the 12th court. The audience admired Miss Ye's charming personality. The pretty girl was not spared from the attention of the young man Mu Linghan, who was staring at her intently. This confused Lu'er, and she slapped the guy on the back, asking, "Aren't beauties always attracted by their beauty?" She said that Yuzhou is very high-minded, and now she won't even look at him because he's not like he used to be. But Mu Linghan replied to her that she might as well not worry since he wasn't interested in girls like Ye Yuzhou. The young man looked at Beauty Ye and said to himself that in principle she was good-looking. But when it comes to incomparable beauty, only the venerable god-killer currently living in Mu Mansion comes to mind. And his name is Yun Yi. Linghan said to himself that although they didn't get along well, but his face was a creation of heaven and earth. And with his cold gaze and noble temperament, he is also peerless in everything. Linghan wondered why she was even thinking about him. Ye Yuzhou and Mu Lingyue had converged on the 12th court, and the duel was about to begin. Lingyue said that fighting the girl was an inevitable victory, so he suggested that she make the first move, asking, "How about 3 moves?" Yuzhou said that this is a fair competition, so she also asks the young master to do his best. The audience admired such a noble act of the girl, because she gave up the advantage. Everyone thought her heart was good. Lingyue smiled politely at his opponent, and said that in that case, it was time to start competing. The young lord immediately exclaimed as he unleashed 1,000-leaf icicles at the enemy. The speed was staggering. 1,000-leaf icicles swiftly flew towards the seemingly fragile-looking Ye Yuzhou. The girl was calm and without panicking used a fire spell to melt the icicles. 1,000-leaf icicles were used to nothing. The girl managed to stop them in flight. Besides, the girl struck back. Mu Lingyue was stunned by what he saw. He stood in a stupor, unable to understand how such a thing could happen. Suddenly, the young gentleman cowered and squatted down. He looked like he was badly wounded. An agitated Yeyuzhu approached the young man. She anxiously apologized and asked if she had hit him hard. The young man said it was her fault and he failed to manage his skills. He admitted defeat and said he was giving up. Yuzhou got to her feet, and with a smile on her face, she sincerely thanked young Master Mu. People were surprised, and there were many opinions. Some even thought that the young man had fallen in love with Miss E, so he decided to admit defeat. Linghan disgruntledly, and with a fraction of anger, looked at everything going on while standing to the side. Liu Er ran up to Ling Yue and began to ask what was wrong with him. She told him that he had dishonored both Bailo Academy and their family. The young man apologized frustratedly, saying that second Miss Ye was very strong, so he was not her opponent at all. It was announced that the next fight would be between Mu Qi and Jiang, and Mu Liuer and Yesheng. After a while, it was announced that the beautiful Liu had won the duel. The jury said that 15 people had won the first round, and whoever drew a blank paper would not participate, and the rest would fight again. Some got number 7, some got number 3. Liu Er asked Linghan what number he had gotten. The girl turned her attention to the piece of paper he pulled out, and it turned out to be blank. Ling unhappily looked at his lucky ticket. The girl grudgingly called him lucky. Yeyuzhou said with a smile that young Master Mu was indeed lucky, as he would not fight anymore. One of the young men said that it was just luck. He wondered why Miss Ye was so friendly to this scum of the Mu family. Liu angrily asked him if he was unhappy with their family in some way and had his own objections regarding the rules of the gathering. The young man averted his eyes from her to the floor, defiantly and grudgingly replying that he had no objection. Mu Linghan was relaxed, and walking off the court said that luck is also part of strength. He sat down on the bench without worrying about anything, but the people around him looked at him obliquely. Linghan didn't understand what was going on. He asked them if they were going to start or did they want him to wait for them. A lot of looks were put on it by completely different people from the competition site. The competition continued with one fight after another. Another young man cried out in pain that he was giving up. The yellow-eyed Liu Er looked menacingly at her surrendering opponent, thanking him for his concession. Yeyuzhou, wearing a charming yellow dress, once again walked off the court with a victory after hearing her opponent surrender. Mu Qi, who had been injured in the fight, could hardly speak. He mumbled that he would admit his defeat. Before young Master Mu could say anything, his opponent slammed his fist into him viciously. Blood spurted out of his mouth and his eyes bulged. Mu Liuer cried out in panic. She became very worried about her relative Mu Qi. The cold-blooded and completely calm assassin Jiang Mo had no mercy on his opponent. A few seconds later, the unfortunate young man Mu Qi was lying on the ground. He did not show any signs of life. Patriarch Mu Yan shouted at the contestant Jiang Mo with all his might to stop. But the cold-blooded murderer paid no heed to the patriarch and continued to beat his opponent, though he no longer resisted. Mu Yan gathered strength in his palm and used a spell, asking how dare he do this. Taking advantage of the spell, he directed a strike of magic towards the scoundrel Zhang. Patriarch Zhang Feng didn't hesitate, and in response he used a spell and launched a fiery strike towards his opponent. The magical emissions from the two sides collided right in the center for the competition grounds. The powerless Mu Qing was still lying on the ground. He mumbled as he admitted his defeat. Jiang Mo stood still coldly, looking at his surrendered opponent. His gaze radiated coldness. Patriarch Zhang Feng angrily shouted at Mu Yan, asking how dare he interfere in a fight on his own accord. Mu Yan responded by telling Feng that this martial arts gathering did not depend on his opinion alone. But the patriarch of the Jiang family asked with a sly smile, "Are they really going to accuse them of not being as good as others?" The Yi family patriarch suggested that they should calm down and forget about the incident, because no one was seriously injured, and the surge of heavenly power would soon begin. Mu Yan agreed with him, while saying that if someone were to make a mean reception, he would not show them mercy. Jiang Mo walked up to the patriarch after the fight was over. Old Feng smiled and said that he had done a great job. Liu Er said that Mo made a killing move, and no one knows the outcome of his past competitions. Linghan said to herself that she hadn't expected to encounter someone with such a depressing aura here. She smirked and also said to herself that she really missed it. The referee announced that the last 8 people out of the final are all those standing in front of him. It was the Mu family. Some people thought Linghan was trash, and some people said that he wasn't as simple as he looked. Among the remaining participants, there was also the Yi family, which included the adorable Yuzhou. Also included was the Zhang family, which included the cunning and cold-blooded Mo. The judge was calmly explaining the nature of the final round. He said it would be very simple, and asked everyone to look where he was pointing. He said that whoever could reach the top of Mengze Mountain first and get the token would take the first place. Mu Linghan and Mu Liuer were standing in the inner part of the enormous and magnificent Mengze Mountain. Linghan said to herself that it was amazing that the tiny town of Elk had such an unfathomable place. She called it a creation of heaven and earth. She also added that it was no wonder that this crowd had to make an effort to set up a magical barrier. Liu said to herself that now that their family had 2 people left, they would want to be surrounded, but they are together. Safety is on their side. She looked at Linghan unhappily and said that if it wasn't for the patriarch's errand, she would have dragged such a burden behind her, to which he smiled embarrassedly and said that in that case, he would have to rely on her. The girl smiled and told him to follow her. Meanwhile, in the Mu family's courtyard, a subordinate told young Master Yun Yi that all the members of the Dark Demon sect were gathering forces. Yun replied that since the Dark Demon sect was so eager to take his life, let them come. He asked if everyone was accommodated. The subordinate said he need not worry as everything is arranged as it should be. He said they could arrive as early as today. A calm Yun Yi asked him, why is it so quiet and peaceful today? He was looking into the distance. The kneeling subordinate replied to the young master that no one dared to make noise here. Yun Yi looked at him bewilderedly as he still did not receive a proper answer. The servant apologized and said that there was a martial arts meeting of Elk City being held today. Hence the Mu family members were nowhere to be seen. The subordinate said to himself that the guy who opens and closes doors and windows loudly isn't there today, so it got quieter. Suddenly, Yun Yi jumped onto the rooftop and told him to follow him, saying that the members of the Dark Demon sect obviously couldn't wait any longer. Liu asked Mu Linghan, how did he manage to win, since although he was Yuanjie, but Jiang Xin's realm was much higher than him. Suddenly, a huge number of sharp blades flying from the sky descended upon them. Linghan cast a wary glance and mumbled in a serious tone that she would soon find out. With a spell, the young man managed to stop the blades from reaching their target. Linghan angrily shouted that it wouldn't be enough to deal with him. There were 3 members of the Jiang family standing by the tree. One of them said that it might not be noticeable, but he still had some abilities. The blonde man with blue eyes said that none of them would be able to escape today, so they'd be better off without resistance. The charming yellow-eyed Liu asked, did Zhang Feng really think that the 3 of them would be enough to stop her? The other guy said that who wins and who loses is not yet known, but in a one-on-one battle she will clearly win. All these words made the beautiful Liu angry, and she decided to use a spell on the scoundrels out of spite. But at this moment, the cold-blooded and completely calm Jiang Mo made a strange movement with his hand. Thus, when the girl's magic strike was about to be delivered, the young lord blocked it, preventing her from striking. He looked at the girl sternly and threateningly, and begged to be allowed to join them. Mu Liu continued to launch a series of attacks on the enemy. She was determined. She decided to use a more serious weapon, and decided to pull a whip from her holster. With a sharp movement, she pulled out a long whip and immediately delivered a deft blow to her opponent. But his opponent was no less agile, and managed to dodge the whiplash by leaping above him. This made Liu reconsider her tactics. She was very wary as the opponent was quite strong. At the same moment, the girl thought that the way out was to use a spell. She furiously used the palm of the Heaven Seal. But none of this frightened the cold-blooded Jiang Mo. At the last moment, he brought his palm to the girl's palm, stopping the blow. One of Mo's henchmen held a loaded crossbow and shouted for his comrade to look out. Mu Liu stood in a stupor. After a moment, the crossbow arrow had barely reached its target, which was her head. The girl felt that the best solution would be to take a step back, letting the arrow fly past. But one of the wily opponents asked with a sneer if she was looking where she was retreating to. The girl was wary. Her face was sweating profusely from nerves. She exclaimed to herself that it was 3 against 1. The cold-blooded assassin Jiang Mo was about to finish off his opponent with a decisive strike. But suddenly, Mu Linghan appeared, who was smiling at the enemy's face. Mo didn't understand what was happening. Linghan was condescending and asked in a calm tone, "Do they really take him for a dead man?" Jiang Mo looked fearfully into his enemy's eyes, grudgingly saying that he was strong. His minions were bleeding sweat behind him. Liu said to herself, only thinking that he was manly, but it was only an illusion, and he is clearly an arrogant and vain idiot. The enemy took advantage of the moment, while Linghan was embarrassed by the compliment, and ordered his subordinates to attack him. One of his subordinates ran at the young man as fast as he could to strike. The second treacherous subordinate began firing his crossbow, covering his comrade. The arrows were already in flight, but the nimble Linghan intercepted the opponent running at him, and thanked him for his help. The enemy was stunned by everything that was happening, but he didn't have to be embarrassed for long, as Linghan had his back to him and was killed. He told the second subordinate that he was not very accurate, and asked him to look at the position of the arrow, for it had taken a life in an instant. The young man who had fired the crossbow was stunned because his comrade had been killed. He shouted in anger that he would kill Linghan. One of the sharp arrows was fired from the enemy's crossbow. It flew swiftly toward its target. Mu Linghan was as agile as ever, and managed to intercept the flying arrow at the last moment. He made a sudden forward motion of his hand, thus throwing the arrow back to the sender. A sharp arrow struck the second subordinate a moment later, literally sealing him into a tree. Jiang Mo was still cold-blooded. He sternly stared into the eyes of his opponents without even making a show of it. His gaze was intimidating, and there was not an ounce of sadness or sorrow in it. The death of his loved ones had no effect on him. Linghan was surprised, after all, both of his family members were dead. And he didn't even raise an eyebrow. This wasn't like the eyes of an ordinary person at all. Suddenly he shouted to Liu'er to be careful. The girl turned around in bewilderment, but the wily Mo behind her back began to make sudden movements. The treacherous opponent created a gap in the ground by jumping away from that spot. Liu and Linghan didn't have time to react so quickly. The girl began to fall into the gap, not realizing what was happening. The gap was very deep. The yellow-eyed beauty screamed with all her might, panic literally taking over her mind at that moment. At the same time, Ye Yuzhou and her subordinates were walking in the forest. One of them asked the second miss if they really didn't need to interfere. A second subordinate asked, would the Zhang family members really be able to handle Liu'er? The other replied that the odds were 50-50. Suddenly, the silently walking beauty in yellow overdress. Yuzhou stopped. The reason was unknown. There was intense excitement and surprise in her eyes. It was as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The subordinates asked the miss why did she stop, but the girl saw young Mr. Yun Yi flying in the sky. Calm Yun looked at his opponents. He was alone against a large number of enemies. The demons flew at him in one large flock. Their flight was swift and rapid. The opponents slyly taunted and shouted that they were glad that they had finally managed to find him. The frightened Yuzhou and the subordinates hid. One of them asked the miss, how come there were so many people in Mengze Mountain? Yuzhou said to herself that one could only enter this place once a year, and only to those who had reached the finals of the martial arts gathering. A subordinate anxiously asked what they should do. Another suggested rushing to the top of the mountain, taking the evidence of their success and descending. Yuzhou asked them to wait for a while, because if they stayed to observe the battle, it would help them in their further cultivation. The girl with bottomless eyes said that it was very rare to accidentally stumble upon a battle of the strongest cultivators. She said that it was dangerous here, so the subordinates had better go to the top of the mountain. But they excitedly said they would follow her. The girl was delighted with the young men and promised that if anything should happen, she would do anything to protect them. One of the demons mocked Yun Yi and said that today was the day of his death, calling him arrogant. But the cold-blooded young gentleman only looked him in the eye in response, asking if they were all here. In just a few seconds, Yun Yi had already used a magic spell, creating a multi-layered net. The demons cursed him for this. The calm lord took his sharp flaming sword in his hand, and with a sharp movement he hurled it into the ground. The demons didn't realize what was happening and were still in the nets. The fiery sword stabbed into the ground. The place where the sword had been stuck began to burn a bright orange color. The fire rose higher and higher. The demons began to scream in panic that it was all a trap. They began to burn in flames. Yun Yi watched silently. The subordinates shouted for the second sister to leave and prevented the Mu family from taking first place. Yuzhou was in tears and asked how they could escape from here. She said that the Mu family members were dead because they had fallen into the hands of the Zhang family. But suddenly, the marvelous spell began to take the other sister somewhere. The subordinates were very frightened for her. It turned out that Yun Yi had used a spell to attract the young beauty to him. In a few seconds, the girl collapsed at his feet and, opening her eyes, began to try to understand what had happened. Getting up from the ground, the girl looked into Yun Yi's eyes with her charming eyes, thanking him. But the young gentleman only asked in response, what did she mean when she said someone was going to get screwed? Yuzhou kneeled down and said to herself that this young master was like a jade that had no equal in the whole world. The girl looked admiringly at the young lord and said that she was talking about Mu Liu'er. Yun Yi warily asked her, are the members of the Mu family here as well? Ye answered him that she did, and here was the finals of the martial arts gathering they had participated in. Yun asked her, didn't she say that someone was going to attack the Mu family members? Yuzhou said that the Zhang family members were going to do this because they hate the Mu family, and this time decided to completely suppress them. The girl coughed slightly. Tears began to run down her face. It was unclear what was happening to her. The subordinates ran up to the other sister and excitedly inquired if she was okay. The girl rose from her knees and still continued to stare at the floor with a frustrated look. She walked up to her savior and delightedly told him that Yuzhou of the Ye family was extremely grateful to him for saving her life. A cautious and serious Yun Yi, in response, only asked where the Mu family members were now. But unexpectedly, the ground beneath Yuzhou's feet began to split in two directions. All of them did not understand what the matter was and what was happening to the ground. Yun Yi found himself on the other side of the rupture. Ye Yuzhou stood at the very spot of the rupture and fell into it. She screamed and begged for rescue. Yun Yi said to himself as Mengze Mountain split open. He hadn't imagined that the force would get so out of control. She looked seriously into the distance and said to herself that perhaps Linghan had also fallen into this gorge. The young master decided not to waste a moment of time and set about rescuing the falling Yuzhou. The girl wondered, would he really save her? The desperate girl smiled at the young master, holding out her hand to him. She barely hoped to be saved. Meanwhile, Liu Er and Linghan were already underground. The girl said that she didn't think there was another world hidden underground. She asked the young man how long they would be walking, and she added that the silence frightened her. Linghan replied that it depended on luck. Liu became wary and asked if he had noticed anything for such a long journey. The young man replied that she should make it clear to her that if it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have to suffer here with her at all. Liu said that no one would want to use it to save her, and she just didn't want to die alone. Linghan began to carve incomprehensible hieroglyphics on the stone wall with his sharp blade. Liu asked what he was doing there. The young man replied that he was leaving a mark on the wall. That way they would know the way in case they got lost. Liu said that he seemed to have a lot of experience in this field. She was a little surprised. Suddenly Linghan stopped for some unknown reason. The girl didn't have time to react and bumped her head against him. The young man swung his hand in a sharp motion, and after a second, he threw the knife forward. Liu was surprised. With a deft and precise throw of the knife, the guy managed to cut the snake in half. It bled out immediately. Liu asked, "Is it really a first-grade yuan beast, specifically a flower snake?" She excitedly said to herself that this snake was only thinking of suddenly attacking, and she didn't even feel it. Liu also said to herself that the entire journey Linghan had demonstrated his abilities more than once, and he was much stronger than she thought. Suddenly, Linghan said with a smile, it looked like they had come to a really good place. Liu was dumbfounded by what she saw. She could barely find the words to say that they couldn't have been so lucky. It turned out they had found a den of flower snakes. There were a huge number of them, and they were ready to kill their victims. Linghan congratulated the girl with a smile, saying that she had guessed. Liu got angry and asked, "Is this really the time for his teasing?" The young man was still calm, and jokingly asked Liu as she thought it had gotten a lot busier around here, hadn't it? The girl got angry and asked, "How does he still have the sense to make jokes?" Linghan continued to smile. She asked, since he wasn't going to use the dagger to finish off all those yuan flower snakes. But suddenly something glowed bright red in the young lord's hand. Liu was surprised. The red color frightened the pack of snakes, and they began to spread out in fear in different directions. He said that the yuan beasts have strictly with class chain. Therefore, the higher-class yuan beasts have suppression over the lower-class beasts. Liu was stunned by what she saw and asked, did he really have a 6th-grade pill? She said to herself that although he was scum, he had such power. A man like that wouldn't put the lives of others in danger. The girl barely if gently touched the young man's shoulder as suddenly something prevented her from doing so. Linghan looked forward with wide-open eyes in astonishment and said that the road had ended. Liu asked a little worriedly, what was this place? And should they touch this gate? Linghan threw a sharp blade and said that if they didn't try it, they wouldn't know anything. A few seconds later, the blade had already reached its target and hit between the upright gate. Yuzhou, meanwhile, grinningly thanked the young master for the recent, saying that if it wasn't for him, she would have already died here. She looked admiringly at the cold-blooded young man and said that she did not yet know his name and wished to thank him in the future. But suddenly, as they passed the stone wall, they noticed an obscure mark on it. They wondered what the mark was even, and who would think of leaving it underground. Young Master Yun Yi smiled and said that it was just some nonsense. He didn't pay much attention to it at all. In his mind, he said that when those two were in the secret realm, they could get out of the traps safely, so this symbol was clearly applied by them. But after a moment, he seriously delved into the topic, saying that only Linghan was left. His gaze was stern, and he realized that it remained to be assumed that Linghan was also underground. Yuzhou looked at the symbol on the stone wall in surprise, and continued to follow the young master. She wondered if that symbol had been left by Liu. She said that it appeared that the man had some sort of attraction to her. She also told herself that if she thought hard enough, she thought he had come down to rescue her, but it looked like he had come for someone else. Yuzhou nervously told herself that otherwise, he wouldn't have been ceremonious and left right away. No one but Liu had crossed her mind. She told the young man that the others had to come down here too, and it would be great if she could meet them as soon as possible. She also said that Liu was the strongest of them all, so she shouldn't have been hurt much, but it was still best to hurry up and find them. Suddenly, the young lord stopped as something strange was happening in front of them. Yuzhou was immediately wary, and became extremely worried as what was happening scared her. A blue color appeared all around, the source of which was unknown. They both stopped where they were to wait it out. Suddenly, a tremendous pressure began to build up throughout the dungeon that could hardly be sustained. Liu and Linghan covered their ears in pain. Both of them were screaming. Linghan said to herself that the pressure was super powerful. But the brave young man decided to continue his journey. He took a confident step forward. Lu'er shouted with all her might that he was crazy and asked him to get out of this place. But a confident Mu Linghan stood his ground and said he would go in anyway. Liu excitedly asked him, "How can you go to such a dangerous place?" Blood was flowing from the young man's mouth. He said that all of this was nothing compared to the Zhongyuan's secret realm. Liu'er was dumbfounded by his behavior, and said to herself that a man like that, having fallen from the clouds into dust, could rise again and keep going. She confidently stood beside Mu Linghan and shouted at the top of her voice, "They will go together!" In a moment there was eye contact between Liu'er and the young man. For a while it was as if they were very close. Linghan said to herself that she couldn't delay, she had to hurry, and she must enter. She also said that as soon as she heard the voice, her body reacted instinctively, and it seemed as if someone was calling out to her. They began to head for the gate so that they could enter it as soon as possible, but still there were doubts. Linghan touched the gate and felt the cold air and wondered where it was coming from. Suddenly, a spirit with a jade tablet appeared in front of his eyes and assisted them. Linghan was surprised and wondered, did the jade tablet protect its master automatically? A very bright blue color emanated from the gates. Liu'er and the young man stood in front of the entrance to them. They became hesitant and immediately entered the gate. It was sunny and splendidly beautiful all around. The young people looked around. Linghan said with admiration that this was a beautiful place. Liu'er looked around and exclaimed with particular surprise, was there really a lake of tourmaline jade in front of her? She said to herself that even after doing a miss at the academy, she had gotten a small piece of tourmaline jade, and there was so much of it here. Linghan carefully approached the lake while plucking a pink charming flower. In his hand was a piece of tourmaline jade. Liu'er couldn't find words for her surprise. The young man asked, wasn't it just a sapphire bone marrow? What was she so shocked about? He said that as a kid, he liked to take a bath with that kind of thing, but later he got sick of the smell of it and forgot about it. Liu'er was sweating in exasperation and anger, for she had devoted many years to obtaining this stone. Linghan smilingly told her that if she wanted, she could take this flower. The girl looked at the flower in surprise. He said to himself that the effect of using it wasn't bad, but if you used it often, you wouldn't get success. He also called Liu'er to follow him. The girl was walking behind her and said in a whisper, who could even care about the things given to them? The charming yellow-eyed beauty Liu'er stood in one place with a pink flower in her hands, surprise and wariness in her eyes. Ye Yuzhou came out from behind a rock, who was happy to see Sister Liu appear, as they were greatly worried. Liu'er asked her in surprise, wondering why she was here too. Linghan stood silently beside her. Yuzhou said that after Mengze Mountain split, everyone had fallen down here, but the place where they fell down was different, so they had to look for them. Mu Linghan warily asked her, what did she mean when she said that they were looking for them? Yuzhou replied that yes, she was not alone, and if this honorable man had not saved her, she would be dead by now. She said that Liu'er was adorable and young Master Mu was handsome and incredible, and they made a great couple. She asked the young gentleman standing behind her back if he would agree with her opinion. In response, young Master Yun Yi only cast a serious glance at the young couple. He looked at Liu'er and noticed the flower in her hand. It seemed very familiar. He said that the jade is low quality, shoddy, and extremely poor quality. Liu'er was wary and immediately hid the jade flower as the young lord's opinion was respected. Linghan asked when it was that Yun had such an interest, and wasn't it true that traveling with a beauty on the side became more interesting? Young Master Yun Yi only coldly looked him in the eyes, while Ye Yuzhou stood behind his back in embarrassment. She was very embarrassed and asked young Master Mu not to misunderstand her. But what right did she have to be around young Master? Linghan said with a smile that of course she had no right. That was why he said that young Master Yun rarely showed such interest. Yuzhou was deeply hurt by these words. She could hardly hold back her tears and looked at the young master excitedly. She wondered how someone could say such a thing, and whether he had said it just for fun or to deliberately shame her. When she wanted to say that what the young master said was wrong, Yun Yi interrupted her, saying that he wasn't that busy. Linghan told the Lord that their meeting could be considered fate, but this is a strange place, and he's not going to drag him down. Liu'er, standing behind the young man's back, squeezed his sleeve lightly to get his attention. She asked him excitedly, would they be safe around the young master? Ye Yuzhou was sweating as she heard all this talk. She said to herself, how dare Liu'er talk like that? She said to herself that Liu had been holding a flower from another man the whole time, and now she was going to ask the other man to protect her. She also noticed that when the two met, the aura of the young man in white became so cold. She wondered if he really liked Liu'er. Liu told Linghan that the more people the better after all. They were all trapped now. So why not think about how they could get out? The young man turned his back to her and in a calm tone told her to do as she knew how. But suddenly there was another split in the ground beneath their feet, and they began to tumble downward. Ye Yuzhou and young Master Yun Yi managed to stay on the ground, and they watched the young men fall. A jade flower fell out of Liu'er's robe, which she had managed to hide from the young lord. She screamed with all her might. The jade flower fell into an obscure pink-colored body of water and began to decompose rapidly. Literally, in a few seconds, the flower petals were already floating on the water. It was completely decomposed. Linghan took a serious look at everything going on and said to himself that this was indeed a strange place, and if Liu fell down, there wouldn't be a bone left of her. The young man managed to stick his dagger into the wall as he fell, but Liu Er continued to fall. He thought about saving her. He became very concerned and shouted with all his might to the girl to use the whip. When Liu Er was about to fall into the water, she swung the whip so that the young man could catch hold of it. Mu Linghan deftly swung his hand, and he managed to firmly grasp the girl's whip. He started climbing the stone wall as hard as he could, yelling to the girl to get up as well. Liu Er was hovering a few centimeters away from the incomprehensible pink water that would eat away at her. She said to herself that if she broke through to the peak of the heaven-controlling stage, she would be able to soar into the air. She considered herself a burden to the young man. Linghan tried his best to keep the dagger in the wall, but he barely had the strength to do so. A concerned Liu Er worried him greatly, and screamed for him to just let go of the whip and let her fall. She told herself that his dagger would not support the weight of 2 men, and he owed her nothing because there was no need for him to sacrifice himself for her. She realized that it was the other way around, that she was the one who owed him. Liu Er shouted that it was her own business whether she lived or died. Mu Linghan was nervous and shouted at her to shut her mouth because she was sick of yelling already. He wrapped the whip around his arm and was determined, for he could not let the girl die. Liu Er looked at it all with tears in her eyes and wondered what she had done to make him suffer so much. With all his might, young Master Mu Linghan tried his best to climb the stone wall, and shouted to the girl to climb up. Liu Er obeyed him and tried to climb the wall with her whip. The young man struggled to stay on the wall. The girl tried to rise as quickly as possible, lest she make the blade fall out of the stone wall. But suddenly the thing she was most afraid of happened. She shouted at Linghan to be careful. The sharp blade failed to support the weight of 2 people, and fell out of the stone wall. Liu Er was dumbfounded. Young Master Mu Linghan immediately began to fall into the pink, corroding water. Liu was greatly frightened. She screamed with all her might. But unexpectedly, young Master Yun Yi came to the aid of the young master, who decided that he would not let the young man perish. Mu Linghan seemed to have already resigned himself to his death and continued to rapidly fall downwards. But his premature demise was prevented by Yun Yi, who was determined not to let the young man die here. The young master used a spell to save him. Something incomprehensible was happening all around. With magical power, young Master Mu Linghan was exalted in the air. Yun Yi coldly observed this. Liu Er was in tears as she watched what was happening. She was utterly bewildered and didn't understand a thing. The young master showed absolutely no emotion and was completely calm. The rescued Linghan jumped onto the stone slab. He, like Liu Er, didn't understand anything at all. His fall was not entirely smooth, but nevertheless, the young man survived and fell into the water. Holding onto his shoulder, he said with a smile that it was all a bit dangerous. Liu Er immediately ran up to him. She continued to cry and hugged the young man tightly, screaming that she was very worried about him. Young Master Yun Yi stood to the side and watched everything that was happening. His eyes opened wide in surprise. He hadn't expected the girl to pay such attention to the rescued man, not the one who had saved him. Mu Linghan held the cute girl's hands and told her with a smile that he was fine. Liu Er looked into his eyes and continued to roar. Linghan said to himself that her gaze was indescribable. The worried girl began to beat the boy lightly, shouting that he was stupid because he knew he could die. The boy said he was in pain. Liu Er stopped crying and excitedly asked Linghan if he was hurt. He replied with a smile that it was originally a small wound, but a couple more punches with her fists, and it would become serious. Liu Er looked at him awkwardly and said to herself that he had risked his life trying to save her, but she had caused him so much pain. Young Master Mu Linghan covered his mouth with his hand to hide his smile. The girl shouted that he was a liar. Young Master Yun Yi continued to watch all of this from the sidelines. Ye Yuzhou told her that she was here. An offended and disgruntled Liu Er turned her back to everyone. Mu Linghan and Yun Yi crossed their gazes. Linghan said to himself that he imagined Yun was about to leap forward to save her, but he immediately pushed the thought away. Ye Yuzhou looked at Sister Liu with her charming eyes, asking her. Turns out she was worried about them. Liu Er looked at her with a serious look, and wondered if she was just now realizing it. Yuzhou said that she had long admired her big name, and was heartily worried for them. Liu Er, however, glared at her angrily and asked why, in that case, she hadn't helped them. Ye Yuzhou asked her sister not to blame her. She began to cry and excitedly said that she was really afraid that something might happen to her. She continued to cry and said that everything happened so fast now that she didn't even have time to react. Yuzhou cried even harder and said that it was all her fault and she should have sacrificed her life to save her little sister. Liu Er called her a pretender to herself. She looked away grudgingly, saying that no one had given up her life, nor would she accept it. Ye Yuju at the same moment began to wipe the tears from her eyes and took her gaze away from her sister. She covered her mouth with the palm of her hand and grinned slyly, like she was up to something. She was still turned sideways. He said to herself that Liu Er had just thrown herself into Linehan's arms, and such a sight would make everyone believe she liked him. She looked at the young gentleman and said to herself, what kind of guy would tolerate a girl he loved throwing herself into another guy's arms? The two couples began to disperse in different directions. Mu Linghan and Mu Liu Er continued on their way. Young Master Yun Yi looked after the departing couple. There was no emotion in his eyes. He told them in a calm tone that there was no passage where they were going. Mu Linghan immediately turned around and asked with a serious face, how did he know about this? Yun Yi answered him that here, regardless of his strength, no matter where he went, there was a dead end waiting for him everywhere. Linghan said to himself that his level was regressing at the moment, but he was only Yuanjie and Yun was stubborn. The young master looked at the young couple and smiled slightly. He realized that they couldn't get out without him. He calmly told them that if they still wanted to get out, they should follow him. Mu Linghan immediately began to speculate on the best course of action. Liu Er suggested that he follow him. She said to herself that this place was full of dangers, and he didn't want to see Linghan in such a dire situation anymore. Ye Yuzhou glanced angrily at Liu Er, saying to herself that was she really going to sit between two chairs. Linghan looked at the young master with a pure gaze, saying that life and death were bound by fate, and he didn't want to be his debtor anymore. But suddenly, something strange began to happen around them. None of them understood what was happening. An unknown demon in armor sternly declared that those who invaded Xuanling's abode would face death. Linghan said to herself that it was the same pressure she felt outside the gate. In recent months, she had been secretly gathering news from all over Losi, but only they had never heard of anything called Xuanling's abode before. She also said that the only expert who could rival this thing in strength was Yun Yi. Liu Er worried and yelled that they got here by accident and didn't mean to offend anyone. She tried to convince the elder that they meant no harm. Linghan told her that words were unnecessary because he was only a puppet. The guard was enraged that some kid dared to call him a puppet. His eyes were red with anger. An agitated Liu Er asked the young man, what should they do in this situation? Linghan asked Yun Yi if his words were still valid. 1. The cold-blooded young gentleman answered him that he remembered his words, and of course they were in force. But he added that he remembered Linghan seeming to say that it was better for them to go apart. The young man became angry. Barely holding back tears of anger, Linghan shouted at the top of his voice that he was taking back his words. Young Master Yun Yi looked him straight in the eyes, asking if he was telling the truth. Linghan stated that he was willing to accept his terms if he would help them get out of here in return. But the guardian of the abode was still angry. He shouted that it was time for the young man to die and struck a blow, but the young man managed to jump aside. Liu Er lay on the ground and screamed with all her might, panic gripping her mind. The guardian wasn't going to stop. Mu Linghan shouted to the young master that he was willing to fulfill 2 conditions in return for being saved. The enraged guardian had no intention of abandoning his target. He was gaining ground to strike again. Concerned, Linghan stared at the opponent, choking him, sweat pouring down his face. It seemed to him that nothing could save him anymore. The guard continued to tightly squeeze his neck. Young Master Yun Yi decided to come to the rescue. He looked at the young man with a serious look, saying that he would have to fulfill 3 of his conditions. Mu Linghan could no longer answer him as his opponent nearly strangled him to death. He began to roll his eyes. Unexpectedly, young Master Yun Yi still intervened in the fight, throwing his opponent aside. The guardian of the abode stood a few meters away from his targets, just looking them in the eye. He wasn't going to let them live. Yun Yi told the young man that this puppet looked hostile towards him. Linghan wondered, could it be because of that call inside him? The young lord used a spell to completely disarm the enemy. The guardian of the abode was bound using his spell, and in doing so, hung straight up in the air. The spell had a strong effect on him, and after a few minutes from the pressure, he shattered into pieces. There was a bright explosion, after which the remains of the guardian of the cloister scattered in different directions. Yun Yi was as cold-blooded as ever. Mu Linghan was a little nervous as the sight was not a pleasant one. Liu Er exhaled a sigh of relief, for Linghan was unharmed. She was surprised. The guardian was powerful and Yun had dealt with him so quickly. Ye Yuzhou admired his strength, and told herself that she had never met a stronger man before, and he was bound to be her boyfriend. Linghan told himself that if Yun Yi makes a move, he is successful, and immediately cuts off all avenues of retreat for the opponent. Liu Er wondered what they should do next, and where were they even? Young Master Mu Linghan and Young Master Yun Yi looked into each other's eyes at this moment. They spotted a palace that wasn't too hard to get to. It was obviously nearby. Mu Linghan smirked and asked the young master if he was willing to go there, to which he immediately agreed. Liu Er became agitated and wondered where to go. And why did she feel as if there was some sort of agreement between them? The young master turned around to the girls, telling them to just follow them. Yunyi walked ahead of everyone. Liu Er followed the young men without interrupting. Ye Yuzhou stood in one place. It was like she was trying to make a decision. She stood in one place for a while longer and was silent. A slight wind was blowing. Ye Yuzhou, after a few seconds, still decided that it would be better to follow everyone. After a while, the foursome reached a creepy place called Xuanling Temple. Linghan said to himself that this must be the very Xuanling abode that the puppet spoke of. He wondered, however, how would such a palace end up under Mengzi Mountain? The four began to climb the steps. On the stairs stood Jiang Mo, who mockingly said that it was fate since they managed to get here alive. Mu Linghan saw the face and realized who this rascal was. Mo looked at him with a serious gaze. The young master angrily asked the rogue if he was surprised that they hadn't died at the hands of that puppet. Jiang Mo replied that those few were already dead, and they were the only ones left. But very soon they would regret it, as they would die 100 times more painful than them. Mu Liuer angrily shouted that it was all the work of that scoundrel. She asked him if he wanted to kill them all here. The treacherous Jiang Mo used a spell. There was a lot of lightning around, and on top of that there was a lot of pressure. He shouted at the top of his voice that it would be a blessing for them to die in a place like this. The patriarchs of the three families were wandering around and saw a bright lightning bolt. The patriarch of the Yi family warily asked what was going on there. The patriarchs were greatly agitated. One of them asked why Mengzi Mountain suddenly collapsed. Patriarch Mu Yan was greatly concerned. He shouted that because they were all still inside. He was very nervous and said that Mengzi Mountain's barrier had been reinforced. Yan also asked what should they do now. He said now, even if some of them sacrifice their lives trying to open it, it won't work. He said to himself that Liu Er and Mu Linghan were saplings, and if something happened to them, no one could take the consequences. Unexpectedly, Patriarch Mu Yan remembered that that person in the white robe could definitely do it. The patriarchs of the Jiang and Ye families exclaimed in surprise, "Where is Brother Mu going?" Feng said that he went to get reinforcements, however. The way to the imperial palace is far, and by the time he finds someone, it will be too late. Patriarch Yi said that it would be good if Yanu managed to find someone, but the main thing for him was to enter Mengzi Mountain to save his daughter Yu Zhou. He turned to Patriarch Zhang Feng, saying that he had an urgent matter come up, so he would leave him. The Ye family patriarch immediately began to swiftly walk away. Patriarch Jiang silently looked after him. He continued to stand still in silence while contemplating something incomprehensible. But after a few seconds, the long-bearded old man smiled evilly, as if he was up to something. He said after the event is over, he would like to see who else in Elk City would dare to speak out against his family. Meanwhile, the treacherous Jiang Mo had planned something that could not be predicted since he was cold-blooded. He calmly pressed a button made of a gemstone that should have opened something. Once pressed, the blue button glowed brightly. Some mechanism must have triggered. The gates in front of Jiang Mo began to open. It was as if bright blue rays were pouring out of them. The treacherous opponent had the ability to control the heavens. After a few seconds, he entered the gate. Liu Er shouted that she was only at the middle stage of controlling the heavens, and the unknown Jiang Mo had already surpassed her and could pass through the void. Mu Linghan decided to act desperately. He ran after his treacherous opponent into the abyss. Liu Er was badly frightened and yelled for him to stop. Linghan was about to jump into the portal. He told himself that the force of the call deep within his heart had become clearer, and wondered what was calling him on the other side. Young Master Yun Yi decided to stop the young man from doing something stupid. He decided to stop him. The Lord wanted to grasp the ends of his long hair to keep him from jumping into the abyss. However, the cold-blooded god-killer didn't have time to do anything. Mu Linghan still jumped into the portal. Yun Yi stood still for a few more seconds, holding his hand in the air. He did not show any emotion. Not long after jumping into the portal, young Master Linghan woke up on the ground. Kneeling down, she felt the pain from the fall. The girl rubbed her head a little. Linghan sat on her knees and looked around at her surroundings. He wondered who was standing in front of her. An unknown long-haired man stood in front of her, his back turned and silent. Linghan became nervous. She excitedly asked him, was it really him, her brother? The young man turned to her and addressed her, calling out Qing'er's name. He smiled and asked if she would like to approach him. He didn't look like he was in any danger. Linghan began to take shallow steps, wondering along the way, how was this even possible? She was very worried and said to herself that the feeling under her feet felt so real. The girl walked up to her smiling brother and said to herself that she wanted to ask him why he had gone and left her alone. She stood in a stupor. She excitedly said to herself that having lost her mom, dad, and baby brother, she was all alone. What was the point of her life going on? The young man smiled and asked her why she was silent. He said he would help and teach the one who had wronged her a lesson. The girl smiled sincerely and replied that with a little brother, dad, and mom, no one would dare to offend Qing'er. Brother hugged his sister, saying that it was true. but suddenly he looked away. Qing'er was greatly surprised and asked her little brother what was he looking at. She didn't understand anything at all. He told her that she had come here just in time, for this time a worthwhile treasure had appeared. The girl asked if it was on the mountain. Looking at the mountain, her brother replied to her that the deceased domain lord Xuanling was seated there. Qing asked, "It comes out, is the so-called Xuanling region actually the burial place of the domain lord?" She said to herself that all the treasures were buried here. There was a reason why Zhang Mo was so distraught. She wondered, where did he get that hexagonal plate from? She also said to herself that he had acted intuitively. The Zhang family's word had planned this long ago. Qing'er asked her little brother why it didn't feel like something was calling her to that place. And the key that opened the door seemed familiar to her. Suddenly it hit the girl. She said to herself that her father had once gotten her one as a toy when she was a child, and when she was collecting relics, this key was among them as well. The girl thought hard. Her brother told her that the domain lord's legacy was there, a whole treasure trove, and he'd already figured out the exact location. He offered to take her there. The brother gently took his cute little sister Qing'er's hand, taking a small step forward. The girl smiled desperately, telling her brother that it would be great if it was really him. Her brother lightly flicked her on the tip of her nose, telling her that it was him, her strongest and most handsome little brother. Qing'er said to herself that she used to be afraid that he would tear off the bridge of her nose, but then she didn't even have the chance to think about it. She clenched the fist of her right hand very hard, mumbling that although she missed her brother, there was one thing. She realized that it was all an illusion, and immediately struck a strong blow at her opponent. The girl threw a punch and started to walk away, saying that he would love that she was stuck here. She said that luckily she had her maid bracelet with her. Also, she had a hexagonal key in her other hand. She considered it and said that if it was a key, there could be two of them. Besides, Daddy had gotten it somehow, hadn't he? She continued to look at the hexagonal key, and in an instant it began to glow brightly in her hands. The hexagonal plate began to seem to emit some kind of energy that flew in an incomprehensible direction. The blue bright beam seemed to show some kind of direction. Its length was enormous. The girl was surprised and wondered why would the jade plate react like that. She looked into the distance and resolutely told herself that she had to check out what was out there. Suddenly, an unknown person's foot emerged from the portal, which appeared to be open. The portal increased in size, and young Master Yun Yi ran out of it. He covered his eyes to avoid getting cornea burn from the bright light. His face was heavily flushed, and there was a lack of understanding of his surroundings in his eyes. He called it all madness. He said to himself that in order to throw people off balance, this illusion links the consciousness to the most important person in the heart. The portal he came out of soon disappeared. The young lord looked away, as if slightly nervous. He saw the legacy of the domain lord's practice before him, and said that no one would refuse to gain mighty power. Patriarch Mu Yan came to their family's palace and shouted at the top of his voice, "Is the honored guest here?" Immediately, the young master's subordinate came running in, who excitedly asked what had happened to Patriarch Mu. The patriarch said that he was asking his master for help because Mengze Mountain had collapsed, and the lives of Linghan and Luer were in danger. The subordinate replied that the young master was not here. He said to himself that he was going to trample the demons into the ground in that very place. He told the patriarch that if anything happened to anyone in his family, the young master would not let it go unnoticed. Yanmu thanked him. The subordinate departed from that place, and the patriarch stood still and began to think deeply. He wondered, what was the relationship between the mysterious young gentleman in white and Linghan? Meanwhile, the lone Qing'er continued her journey. She had reached Milo's Death Mountain. The girl was passing something similar to a canyon. The place was not particularly wide, and the girl continued on her lonely way. Qing'er was still oriented by the rectangular green key, but suddenly she was greatly surprised. Peeking out from behind a large stone, she saw the scoundrel Jiang Mo standing near the marble monument. He attached the same rectangular green key as the marble monument on Xuanling's grave. She said to herself that there seemed to be only one place for a jade plate, but Mo had already opened the gate of his, so it was clearly not fake. The girl also told herself that her jade plate had also reacted. A large yellow ray began to emanate from the monument. The spirit of a white-haired man ascended from the grave. His eyes were closed during the ascension. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes and calmly said that to his surprise, a long time had passed. Qing'er watched from behind the stone and was greatly stunned. She said to herself that this man was a powerful cultivator after all. Zhang Mo tried to be fearless and asked with a snide smile, "Turns out he is the one who is the sealed spirit?" A cool and calm spirit answered the young man that he was quite knowledgeable on the subject. Zhang Mo fell to his knees and asked the elder, since he was already dead, why not pass on his legacy to the younger generation? He told the elder that he had managed to get the key purely by chance, and if he could get the elder's legacy, he would be his benefactor forever. The elder spirit condescendingly asked him, Was he really here to get his legacy? Jiang Mo was still on his knees and began to urge the elder to hand over the inheritance to him. But suddenly the spirit of the older one struck the younger one, so that in a moment he was already lying on the sand. Jiang Mo shook himself off and coughed up blood. Such an act by an elder slightly angered him. He looked sternly at the elder and said that the younger should not be offended, but since he was deceased, the younger would inherit his legacy. The spirit smiled caustically and asked, did he dare to covet this domain lord's things? Jiang Mo said that he didn't expect that the demon lord Xuanling from the rumors would turn out to be such a selfish person. The elder smiled and asked again if he had heard correctly, and the young man said the name of domain lord Xuanlin. He shouted at the top of his voice, how dare he compare this domain lord to that bastard? Qing'er was still peering out from behind the rock. She was highly alert and watching what was happening. Jiang Mo became very nervous and asked the elder at the top of his voice, who was he anyway? The elder told him that he could be wrong about anything, but he was really a fool. However, since he came, he would stay here. A few seconds later, Jiang Mo's neck began to be shackled by a spirit magic spell. The elder told him that since he had shown up at the Xuanling's place of origin, he would be buried next to him. Jiang Mo couldn't answer him anything as he was already blushing red from choking. He was completely powerless. The young man was barely alive, and his death was only minutes away. Unexpectedly, he was able to use his magic spell technique to strike his opponent. The spirit only laughed in response and said that his techniques weren't enough. He asked, since he was looking for Xuanling, why wouldn't he die? Jiang Mo sternly looked into his opponent's eyes, not giving in to his provocation. He silently pondered how he should proceed. He was determined to destroy his opponent for all his bad deeds. The young man looked him coldly in the eye. She threateningly and loudly declared that it didn't matter who he was. He would still accept his legacy today. Qing'er said to herself that this was the Divine Soul stage, and this kind of power definitely couldn't belong to Jiang Mo. In the canyon near the tomb, a serious fight broke out. The battle between Jiang Mo and the Spirit Elder was to the death. The young man fought against the Elder with all his might, while the latter only laughed in his eyes. Patriarch Zhang Feng asked Brother Mu what was the matter and had he found help. He said this is not at all a problem that any cat or dog can solve. Patriarch Mu Yan wondered, how could someone who follows a young man in white be weak? The young man in white at the same moment coldly glared at the patriarch of the Zhang family. Zhang Feng was greatly dumbfounded when he saw him. He said to himself that he shouldn't mess with this guy. Meanwhile, the fight between the elder and Jiang Mo continued. The young man was trying to destroy his opponent with a spell. A magical blow hit the monument on the grave. Something indescribably strange began to happen. Two different spells merged into one as the opponent struck. The monument began to emit incomprehensible rays. Suddenly it was as if a volcano was erupting from the ground. A hot beam pierced the ground. Jiang Mo was dumbfounded. Qing'er continued to watch everyone from the sidelines. She tried to figure out what it was. While the girl was watching, someone started approaching her from behind, but she didn't hear it. The wary girl continued to watch everything that was going on, and the unknown man's hands were almost closing in on her. Suddenly, Qing'er smelled something wrong and wondered what was going on behind her back. She heard footsteps. She deftly intercepted the unknown man's hands that wanted to touch her. It turned out to be Ye Yuzhou. After Qing'er grabbed her hand, she became extremely worried. Ling Han said that he did not expect to meet anyone. It turns out the second Miss Ye prefers such sneaky tricks. Yuzhou said fearfully that she just accidentally tripped and pushed him by mistake. She asked not to misunderstand her. Ling Han told her that if she wanted the treasure, she had better say so, but she didn't have the strength to confess. He said sneakily and insidiously. The young man squeezed the girl's hand very hard. The pain almost tore her head off, and she screamed for him to let her go. Suddenly, the young man let go of the girl's hand and began to scream, losing her coordination in the process. The girl fell to the ground right in front of Jiang Mo and the elder. She was lucky and had almost no injuries on her. The elder was lenient and asked Jiang Mo in a calm tone, was he willing to receive or would he leave? Jiang Mo at the same moment started running as fast as he could towards the desired item. Time was short. Ye Yuzhou watched his actions and said to herself that this was all very bad. She shouted with all her might that it belonged to her, not him. Jiang Mo didn't listen to her and ran towards his goal. The young man still managed to reach his target, and he grabbed the legacy in a sharp move. Mu Ling'an watched all of this from the side while not interfering. He was greatly surprised. Ye Yuzhou was immediately cast aside. The elder, on the other hand, simply watched the young one's struggle for the legacy. Jiang Mo began to laugh joyfully, saying that the legacy of Domain Lord Xuanling belonged to him. Ling Han glared angrily at the elder, who had his back turned to him, who merely smirked. Ye Yuzhou shook off the blow but was still lying on the ground. She glared angrily at her opponent. She made a sharp movement with her palm, causing it to encircle the forearm of the jubilant Jiang Mo. The young man drew his attention away from the legacy he had managed to grab, and looked warily at his hand. Looking at his hand, the young man realized that the treacherous girl had poisoned him with her venom. The older one began to scoff caustically, and said he had finally waited for that coveted day. He mockingly said that it was indeed Xuanling's bone, but they don't even know that he used it for suppression. Yayuzhou and Zheng Mo were excited to the point where sweat was running down their faces. They didn't understand what he was talking about. Qing'er said to herself that this was Milo's Mountain of the Dead, and Domain Lord Xuanling had used this place to suppress his enemy. Zheng Mo sternly looked at his opponent's face and asked if he was afraid of being suppressed again. The spirit only laughed and said that now he was free and the bone could no longer control him. He wrapped the innocent beauty Yayuzhou in an incomprehensible pink shell. The girl began to scream. She yelled to the older man that they had no hard feelings and she got here by accident and had no intentions of stealing anything. She begged for mercy. He took her by the chin and asked if she thought he was that stupid. The frightened Yuzhou said that it was not so at all. The older one pressed his face to hers and said he was sorry he'd have to screw up that face with such a brainless owner. Yuzhou was very much frightened and said that if he let her go, she would be willing to do anything for him. The older man was pleased by the offer. He asked if it was true that she would do anything he wanted. Yuzhou looked into the older man's eyes and was scared to death, for she didn't understand what thoughts were in his head. The elder was contemplating the girl's charming body. Yayuzhou cried out in fear as she guessed what he wanted to do to her. The older man smiled caustically and asked the frightened beauty, "Didn't she say she was willing to do anything?" He said that this domain lord hadn't tasted women in a long time, and asked because if she served him well, it would be good for her, right? The girl was scared and sweating from nerves. She said to herself, why should this be good for her? She kept telling herself that she had fallen in love with that guy with all her heart, so how could her man be this twisted old man? The girl covering her breasts said she would be honored to serve him, but she had an acquaintance who was much prettier than her. Qing'er stood silently to the side and continued to watch. She became wary as she realized Yuzhou was talking about Liu'er. She said to herself that Yuzhou was a sneaky hypocrite because she was going to frame another to keep herself alive. The older one said he knows who she's talking about, but he likes the gentle, affectionate, and sweet ones like her better. Qing'er wondered if he had been seeing Liu'er. She wondered if it was in that illusion. She realized it was all his fault. When the elder gently began to approach the lovely Yuzhou, the girl told herself that she must figure out a way to get out. She exclaimed and started pointing her finger at Mu Linghan, who was standing to the side. She shouted that he was the cutest. She also told the older one that he also has a younger twin sister who's also beautiful. Linghan called her a sneaky viper. He also said to himself that she should know that Mu Qinglan was dead, but she dares to make up such a thing. The older man looked at the handsome young man with a smile, as if he was fantasizing about something. He said to himself that the young man was thin, but his looks were matchless. He wondered if his sister could match the girl in his arms. The older man told the young man that if he would give him his sister, he would spare his life. Young Master Mu Linghan glared threateningly at his opponent, shouting that this would only be in his dreams. But suddenly, someone's male voice shouted that the spirit only seeks death, and it succeeds. Suddenly, young Master Yun Yi swooped down on the elder and began to prevent him from killing the young man, Mu Linghan. He looked into his eyes and said to himself that this degenerate dared to dream about Mu Qinglan. His gaze was stern. The elder was stunned and said to himself that he didn't know who the man was and didn't even notice his presence. Yuzhou, with a sharp movement, managed to escape from the spirit's grip while his attention was on the young master. The girl was very scared. She ran as fast as she could to Yun Yi to save her. Yuzhou endured a lot of stress, and finally, when she reached the Lord's feet, she fell to her knees and exhaled. She could hardly hold back her tears and began to thank the young master for coming to save her. Yun Yi, on the other hand, was as stern and cold-blooded as ever. He immediately started running towards the enemy. A few seconds later, he faced his opponent, a serious fight breaking out between them. The young lord stared menacingly into the eyes of his opponent. He was enraged. Qing'er said to herself that there was a murderous aura surrounding Yun Yi. She wondered if with that technique he might have provoked Yun Yi's anger. The young man in the white robe was greatly angered, and decided to use a spell to deal with his opponent. The older man looked at him nervously and expired with sweat. He shouted loudly to the young man that he was insane. He kept shouting that he was giving up and asked if he wasn't looking for that Xuanling guy's inheritance. He promised to give everything to him. But the young man in white did not listen to his opponent, after anger took over his mind. He used a spell to bind his enemy. A moment later, the older man was bound by a spell. He didn't understand how it had happened. He said to himself that ordinary Yuan artifacts were unable to harm a sealed soul, and wondered who he was and what was the reason for such anger. The elder panicked a lot, and asked the young man if it was because of that girl that he was taking revenge on her. Yuzhou watched all of this admiringly and a little excitedly. There was a hope inside her that the young master was really avenging her. Ching'er aside, she wondered why Yun was so angry. She realized that he was clearly not angry because of Ye Yuzhou, since he was cold-blooded. She clenched her fist and began to ponder what reason he had for being angry then, if the girl had nothing to do with it. She began to speculate about something, but immediately began to push those thoughts away from her, saying it couldn't be. Ching'er eyed the young lord warily and asked herself how was this possible. Young Master Yun Yi at the same moment shifted his cold gaze to young Master Mu Linghan. The young man also continued to look into his eyes. His gaze was like a bottomless ocean. He said to himself that those eyes, they looked so much alike, just like one another. The older man could not move as he was restrained. He looked puzzled at the young man in white who had turned his attention away from him. He grinned and asked loudly where the young man was looking. He had caught his attention with his laughter. Young Master Yun Yi immediately turned to him, looking at him sternly. He clearly wanted to straighten him out. The wily Zhang Mo stood to the side while holding the legacy bone in his hand. He was nervous and didn't understand what was going on. Something strange began to happen all around. The bone began to emit a blue color. The blue color literally filled the canyon they were all in. Zhang was puzzled. Mu Linghan became nervous and tried to figure out what was going on around him after all. And where did this blue barrier come from? He looked at the rectangular green plate that acted as the key. His gaze was worried. Suddenly, blue radiation wrapped young Master Mu Linghan in a shell. Everyone around him was puzzled. The young man, being in a blue shell, began to fly rapidly in an unclear direction. Young Master Yun Yi saw what was happening and became worried about the young master. He wondered how to help him. He immediately began to follow Mu Linghan to rescue him. He hoped that the young man was still alive. Ye Yuzhou shouted after him that she was here, while asking, wasn't he concerned about her safety? Zhang Mo said to himself that he didn't expect such a secret to be hidden here. He realized that he wouldn't get the legacy, but he had to save his life. The older man smilingly told Xuanling that he hadn't expected him to trump like this and admitted his defeat. He smirked and asked if he thought the kid he had chosen could save him. He continued to mock. Mu Linghan continued to follow the jade tablet while in the blue shell. He was in an unknown place. The young man turned to the jade plate, asking where it was leading him to after all. He was puzzled. He was surprised that there was a lake below him, and realized that it turns out there had been a lake below all along. Suddenly he saw something completely unexpected. His gaze was filled with a special kind of amazement. He was followed by Yun Yi. He wondered what he was doing here, and why he was here in the first place. Linghan said to himself that he was here in search of an inheritance, and why did the man even follow him? The young lord in the white robe was rapidly catching up to the young man, and had already practically grabbed hold of his leg. But young Master Mu Linghan turned on his back and with a sharp movement pushed his hand away from him. He looked at him with his bottomless eyes and smiled slightly, letting him know he didn't need any help. Young Master Yun Yi looked at all of this with bewilderment. He didn't understand why the youngster had decided to do such a thing. The master stood in a stupor, watching the young man fly away from him. He glanced at the hand that the young master had pushed away, mumbling softly that he had received a rejection. But smirking slightly, the young lord decided to use a spell to be able to walk on water. He didn't hesitate or delay and immediately used the spell. His foot stepped on the water. Suddenly, he discerned something not far from him. His gaze was slightly worried. Young Master Yun Yi looked at young Master Mu Linghan sitting on the bank, who was powerless. A young man with wet hair sat silently on the bank, looking down tiredly. A light breeze blew his hair. Suddenly, Yun Yi became extremely wary as he began to realize that this was not Mu Linghan. After a few seconds, the puzzle in his head came together, and he discerned the person across from him as Ching'er. Still, after a few seconds, he told himself that he had imagined it, and it wasn't her at all. Mu Linghan looked down tiredly. His pink bottomless eyes were magnificent and carried a lot of meaning. The young master got to his feet. Yun Yi continued to look at him from the side without saying anything to him. Linghan asked eldest young Master Yun, "Who did he just call out to?" The young man's gaze was serious. The young master also asked the young master, did he recognize him as the wrong person? Mr. Yun Yi in the white robe replied to the young man that not at all, it was true, and he had confused him with another person. Linghan asked him, what could those words mean then? And did he really think that his little sister couldn't find peace and stayed in this world? Yun Yi condescendingly replied to him that he had not seen Mu Qinglan die with his own eyes. The young man angrily said that he and her were feuding with Yun Yi, and he is trying to chase after them again and again. In response to his reproach, the young master only asked whether his sister Mu Qinglan was dead or alive. But young Master Mu Linghan, looking at the floor, began to laugh. The reason for his laughter was unknown. He folded his arms and raised his head. The laughter continued. Young Master Yun looked at him silently. Linghan asked him, does the Lord think he doesn't want this and doesn't want to see her alive? The young man shouted that his sister was his dearest person, and if it were possible, he would give his life to keep her. Young Master Yun Yi only looked at the floor, while not showing any emotion. He continued to remain silent. In his mind, he saw Mu Linghan. He said he was skeptical, but those eyes, they were exactly like hers. He also told himself that this boy's body was changing everything, and if even a Yuan artifact capable of changing the body, he couldn't feel it. Linghan told the young master that he was still the same. He didn't understand people, and he also took an interest in his sister. Yun Yi only continued to look at the floor, and condescendingly replied to him that it was still how to know. The Yun replied to him that he didn't want to see anything like that again in the future, and asked what wasn't good. Was it for Yun Yi? As he left, Mu Linghan turned around and said that aside from all this, the young master had no right to call his sister Qing. The young lord in the white robe was completely calm, and standing on the water looked at the young man. He cast his frustrated gaze downward, not at all sure how to act. He grasped his head slightly and wondered how he could possibly be interested in her. Yun Yi lightly bit his lip, telling himself that they were not compatible at all. After all, he was just. But the young master didn't have time to say anything. The girl continued to wander. There was a slight fog around. She was a little surprised. Turning around, she wondered in surprise, did Yun Yi not follow her? The spirit asked her to be careful. She angrily replied to him that if she hadn't been careful, she would have died long ago. Qing said that she even intentionally showed him her body this time. Now he should stop doubting. She said that given Yun's arrogant nature, he would obviously still have doubts, but at least there would be no close surveillance. The girl kept walking forward and said let him leave and not even speak to her, and that was even for the best. Suddenly, she looked at the rectangular greenish plate with great surprise. She wondered what else was wrong with her. There was something strange with the jade plate. The girl wondered why the jade tablet had undergone such a transformation. After all, it had only dispelled Yun Yi's doubts. She thought that something had entered it. The spirit told Qing that same hour that it was unspeakably lucky. The jade tablet continued to transform. Red rays began to emanate from the jade tablet. The girl wondered if this was the legacy of Domain Lord Xuanling. The jade plate moved to the girl's head. It was still emitting a red light. A voice began to come out of the plate saying that he didn't expect her to be a girl. Qing looked at the plate with astonishment and asked, "Is this really him, Domain Lord Xuanling?" A voice from the jade plate replied to the girl that she hadn't heard that name in a long time. The younger Mu Qinglan bowed, and said that she respectfully greeted Domain Lord Xuanling. A voice praised her, calling her bright. The voice also said that he remembered his jade plate being taken by a guy. Qilin exclaimed, "Isn't that person's name Mu Feng?" The Lord replied to her that he didn't even remember how long ago it had been, as a lot of time had passed, and he wouldn't remember such a thing. But suddenly he told the girl that, however, she looked exactly like that young man. The girl told the elder that she was Mu Feng's daughter, and she had gotten this token from her father. She said that she had gotten here by pure chance. The older one asked why her father didn't come. Had he forgotten his agreement with the old man? Mu Qinglan excitedly said that her father was already dead, and would not be able to come here to fulfill him. The elder said it was a shame, as her father was a rare genius. But since she was here, she had to fulfill their agreement. The girl looked at the plate in surprise, asking the older man what agreement he had made with her father. He said that they made an agreement with Mo Feng that he would kill Zhou Haomo, and afterward he could get the Lord's inheritance. The elder said Zhou was a sealed soul, and they were enemies who died together. He said he used the remnants of his life to suppress him. Qinglan said that even her dad couldn't intervene in this battle, and after becoming stronger, he couldn't keep his promise, and was killed. The Domain Lord said that he felt she would be much stronger than her father. The spirit asked him to hurry with the transfer of the inheritance. Mu Qinglan looked at the jade token admiringly. The voice laughed and told her that her friend had a very bad temper. The girl asked Xue Yu, "Is he really so bold that he begs for other people's things?" She told the elder that Zhou Haomo was finished off by Yun Yi, therefore she cannot claim this legacy. Senior said that she was smart, but she was shallow. He asked, didn't he kill Zhou for her? He also said that everything that happened was under his control, and asked if she wanted to know who he saw in that illusion. Mu Qinglan condescendingly replied to the elder that the topic was of absolutely no concern to her. The voice from the jade token said that this girl was very cruel. He wondered how to find common ground with her. Eventually, the Domain Lord told Mu Qinglan that the legacy was hers and asked to accept it. The younger one thanked the elder. The voice began to say that he, Xuanling, was using blood as a guide and was transmitting to Mu Qinglan all the knowledge he had gained throughout his life. He vocally told the jade plate to open up. Mu Qinglan sat silently and accepted the legacy. The girl felt intense pain in an instant. She didn't give any sign of it, continuing to sit silently. The voice told her that it would be extremely painful for Yuanzi to get all of his inheritance, but her life veins were expanding so fast. Qinglan replied that it had been a long time since she had experienced such a strong blow, and sometime they had been blocked. Now they had recovered. The elder exclaimed, "Why is she talking about it so calmly, and why is she now Yuanji?" He asked, Is she really trying to deceive him? He said admiringly that he first thought that she could only withstand 10% of his strength, but already a full third was coming out. Mu Qinglan continued to commandeer the legacy of Lord Xuanling. She silently endured all that pain. Shui Yu exclaimed that he had broken through to the initial energy stage. The spirit was greatly stunned. The elder exclaimed, not only does she want to take over his legacy, but also jump to the next stage. There was pain and intense worry in Patriarch Mu Yan's eyes. He was very afraid for his relatives. The young man in the white robe told him that there was no need to worry because his young master was also there, so nothing would happen. He said to himself that if anything happened to that young man, the young master would not be left out. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the mountains. Red radiation was beaming brightly into the sky. This was the stage of controlling the heavens. The patriarchs of the Jiang and Mu families were greatly dumbfounded. Zhang Feng shouted that this was the heaven management stage and didn't understand how this was possible. But with a sly smile, he said to himself that such a clash was because of the Domain Lord's legacy, so it worked out. Unexpectedly, Ye Feimin appeared with a long-haired, gray-haired man. They looked at the patriarchs with serious eyes. Zhang Feng and Mu Yan didn't understand what was going on. They turned around to look at what was happening. Feng warily wondered when Feimin had managed to contact a member of the Spiritual Phoenix Academy, and had Ye Yuzhou really been elected to the academy. Patriarch Yi told Elder Su that his daughter is on the mountain and it is unknown if she is alive. He said that she is his favorite daughter, so he asks him to save her. The elder was determined. He told the patriarch not to worry, for he would come in and save her. Suddenly, he found himself utterly bewildered as he saw a familiar person fall out of the portal in front of him. At the feet of the patriarchs fell a wounded youth who was lying on the ground and was powerless. Zhang Feng fearfully shouted that it was Zhang Mo. The young man's face was covered in abrasions, and a small stream of blood was coming out of his mouth. The patriarch asked the young man where the Domain Lord's legacy was. Mo replied that the Mu family had it. Feng nervously asked him if he was sure Mu Linghan had it. The young man replied that he was. The patriarch shouted to Mu Yan not to think that the Mu family was allowed everything, and by insulting the Zhang family, they would not see a good life. Patriarch Yan gave him a puzzled look and asked, why would Mu's family be afraid of his family? Suddenly, a young girl's head peeked out of the portal. She was wounded and looked tired. It turned out that it was Ye Yuzhou. Her father, Patriarch Ye Feiming, immediately ran up to his daughter in a frightened manner. He was very worried and panicked, asking who dared to treat her like that. The girl only cried. The elder angrily said that he would like to see who had so much courage to bully an academy member. Feimin asked her to tell her. Ye Yuzhou continued to cry, and looking into her father's eyes said that no one harmed her. She just didn't pay attention. Elder Su told her that as a member of the Spiritual Phoenix Academy, if anyone dared to offend him, he would repay in full. The girl cried and told her father that when the mountain collapsed, they all fell down and she could not protect them. The father tried to comfort his daughter. She said to herself that Zhang Mo didn't get anything, so Mu Linghan or Yun Yi has the treasure. Yuzhou asked her father why he had called the elder, since she wasn't in that much danger. She apologized to Su for disturbing her. The elder looked at the girl condescendingly, saying that she had a very good heart and thought of others rather than those who would do harm. The girl replied that she was fine, and if Mr. Mu hadn't helped and pushed her out, she would have died by now. Father warily asked who pushed her. Yuzhou said that Ling'an had done it, and if it hadn't been for him, she would have died because it was dangerous. Patriarch Ye Feiming shouted to Mu Yan that this was impertinence and his Mu family was overreaching. The patriarch asked what did he mean. Ye Yuzhou tried to calm her father down and said that she and the elder had misunderstood something. Elder Su stroked the cute girl's head, saying that she was too naive. Feiming angrily asked Mu Yan, did they really want to take this opportunity to harm Yuzhou? He threateningly ordered the Mu family patriarch to immediately bow down and apologize. Patriarch Mu Yan asked, how could one party's words be believed? He said that what happened in this incident has yet to be verified. He also fearlessly looked into Ye Feimin's eyes, saying that he could only dream of being able to bring him to his knees. Elder Su exclaimed that the Mu family patriarch had used swift energy blades. Mu Yan told himself that he had to hold out until Linghan and Liu Er returned. Sweat ran down his face from nerves. Feimin said to himself that the Mu family was in Elk City due to the strength of the capital of the empire, and he had long wished to oust this family. Zhang Feng said to himself that if Linghan got the inheritance, he would never let the Mu family go. And now was a great opportunity to get rid of them. The wily patriarchs of the two families looked at each other and realized that they would act together. A few seconds later, the Mu family patriarch was attacked by 3 insidious opponents who wanted to get rid of him. Patriarch Mu Yan continued to stand on his feet. He tried to be cool-headed and remain calm. 3 wily opponents surrounded him, and he looked into the eyes of each with a serious look. Zhang Feng said to himself that when they dealt with Mu Yan, he would beat everything he had managed to eat out of Mu Linghan. The serious patriarch of the Mu family asked them, did they really think the Mu family would let them get away with killing him? Elder Su only told him that when death is near, words have no meaning. The enraged Jiang Feng shouted that when he died, he would no longer be able to ask such stupid questions anymore. He swooped down on Patriarch Mu. Patriarch Mu Yan took advantage of the spell. He tried his best to stop the enemy's onslaught. He was slightly wounded and a small trickle of blood flowed from his mouth. His face was more serious than ever. Elder Su took advantage of the patriarch being distracted and shouted that now was the time for him to die. The angry gray-haired old man began to clench his fingers to use the spell. But suddenly one of his fingers was cut off and flew away. Blood began to gush from his hand. The treacherous elder screamed in pain and didn't realize who could have done this. The blood was gushing non-stop. Suddenly, Mu Linghan appeared in front of them and said that he was a member of the Mu family and asked if they wanted to deal with him. He asked Elder Su with a smile on his face, would he kill himself or did he need help? Patriarch Mu Yan was surprised and rejoiced at the appearance of young Master Mu Linghan. The elder held his bloody hand with his other hand. The young man in the white robe said to himself that he was wondering if he should step in and help, but good thing he showed up. He wondered where the young master was. The elder asked, how dare a young boy speak to him in such a tone? He called the young man an arrogant boy. Mu Linghan looked the old man in the eyes and asked, did Elder Su not recognize the old friend when he met him? Suddenly the old man became alarmed. He excitedly asked, could it be that this Mu family was related to the Mu family from the capital of the empire? He turned his back to the young men, saying to himself that it was better to die 8 times than to face this demon king again. The old man glared angrily at Patriarch Ye Feimin, asking if he would have faced Mu Linghan if it wasn't for him. Su said to himself that the young man was no longer the genius capable of summoning wind and rain, for his life veins had fallen into disrepair. The elder told the young man that they had not seen each other for a long time. He asked if he had run out of space in the capital, and had decided to move to the open spaces. Linghan said that no matter how good a place is, it will become uncomfortable if nasty people get into it. Su shouted for him not to be so arrogant. After all, he was no longer a high-flying bird. The young man asked, why did he decide to teach him about life? The old man said he would make him realize that he was now nothing more than a degenerate, not worthy to be called even a dog. Patriarch Mu Yan became very worried about Mu Linghan. He immediately ran up to the young man. He told him that he would distract Su and he would take advantage of the moment and run away. Linghan asked if he was sure he would stay alive while surrounded. Mu Yan said that he would still be able to fight for a while, and there was no way he would let anything happen to the young man. The patriarch's nobility and heroism greatly surprised Mu Linghan. He looked at him with particular amazement. The young master smiled and told the Mu family patriarch that he would not run away and would stay with him. He said confidently that he should not trade his life for his survival, and if anyone was destined to die, it was their opponents. The young master's subordinate wondered, what did young Master Mu Linghan want to do? Suddenly, young Master Yun Yi appeared, coming to the aid of the Mu family. The subordinate was stunned, but the lord went the other way. The young man in the white robe wondered, shouldn't he help the Mu family? Yun's back was turned to the servant. He told him that if he wanted, he could help Linghan, only then he might not come back. The agitated subordinate apologized to the master, saying that he would not dare to do so. He did not understand what had happened between them. The treacherous Elder Su used a spell and shouted at the top of his voice to Mu Linghan that he would finish him off. The young man's eyes were indescribably red at this moment. There was only rage and a desire to destroy. He asked the elder to lend him his strength. The young master was preparing for the most serious battle. Elder Su greatly panicked as the youngster used the suppression practice of a domain lord. Patriarch Ye Feimin was panicking as much as his associate. He was dumbfounded by the fact that he wasn't moving. Jiang Feng joined his comrade's panic, saying to himself that Mu Linghan had really stolen the inheritance. The patriarchs and the elder stood aside and were extremely nervous, for the young man was insanely strong. Feiming shouted to him that their family had supported him before, but he didn't think that he would turn out to be so despicable and betray Yuzhou to death. Mu Lingyan was calm. He asked the patriarch with a smile, what had he done according to Second Miss Ye's mouth? The old man shouted that the girl wanted to help him, but never thought he would push her towards her fate. Lingyan said that it turns out he is the one accused of pushing the second Miss Yi. Ye Yuzhou stood to the side, nervously looking at the floor. Her face was covered in abrasions, and her dress was tattered. The young man stated that in that case, he would act according to his reputation. He used a spell against the girl. Elder Su and Patriarch Ye Feimin were greatly afraid for the young girl. In the father's eyes there was indescribable fear for his daughter. Shrouded by the young master's spell, the girl began to scream with all her might to be rescued. Linghan calmly told her that he had heard her accuse him of pushing her, wanting her dead. The frightened Yuzhou assured him that he had not. Patriarch Ye Feiming was greatly worried about his daughter and shouted, "Isn't Mu Linghan afraid of anything? But at the same moment, the young man used a spell on the old man, thus closing his mouth. Scared to death, the girl fell to the ground and tried to crawl away from the young master. She saw young master Yun Yi and began to shout loudly, asking for his help. But his back was turned. The cold-blooded young master Linghan asked Yun Yi in a calm tone, did he want to save this girl? The young master heard those words. He continued to remain silent and shifted his gaze slightly to the side. He softly told the girl that she was dirty. He was as cold-blooded a god-killer as ever. Yuzhou grabbed her face and asked if hers was too dirty, and he was disgusted to look at her. She wondered to herself if it wasn't for the scoundrel Mu Linghan, would she have stooped to this level? The young master said to himself that the wounds on her body were not as painful as what Yun Yi had said, and it was better for her to know how sinister people's hearts were. Young Master Yun began to walk away, and his young subordinate in a white robe followed behind him. Linghan asked them, were they really leaving already? He wondered if Ju-Qa didn't need him anymore. He shouted after them with a smile that in that case he would accept it all with gratitude. The young master and the servants did not look back. But unexpectedly, Yun Yi reminded the young master of the first condition in a soft tone. Young Mu Linghan immediately became wary as he recalled that very first condition. The young gentleman asked him to let him know if there was any news of her in the future. That was his first condition. The young subordinate in the white robe looked around and wondered, who was he even talking about? Yuzhou was sitting on her knees in a tattered dress. Her entire body was covered in scratches. She asked, why, young master, why is he doing this? Suddenly the girl became very angry and shouted at the top of her voice that Mu Linghan was not human. The young master asked Yuzhou, since he pushed her, why doesn't she take the chance and follow through? Patriarch Ye Feiming shouted that all of the Mu family members were scum, and the young man was going to commit murder right in front of everyone. Elder Su was running out of sweat and loudly asked Linghan, how did he manage to use this kind of suppression? But the young man only used suppression in their direction in response, asking the old man to finally die already. The magical suppression strike worked, and after a few seconds the elder was tossed aside. Ye Feiming realized that it was useless to resist the young master. After all, even Elder Su had been defeated by him. He immediately said with a smile that he surrendered and would never go against the Mu family again. He said he would never do that again. Lingen said he would remind him that the patriarch was eager to skin him and rip out his tendons to avenge second Miss Ye. Ye Feiming immediately made Ye Yuzhou apologize, saying that she just didn't understand Third Master Mu's true intentions. He reiterated again for the daughter to apologize immediately, but the girl wondered why she should apologize. Mu Linghan put his hand to his chin, asking, isn't it the offender who should be asked? The frightened patriarch agreed to everything the Third Master said. The wounded Su watched everything and called Feynman shameless to himself. The elder recovered and threateningly told Linghan that he could try to kill him if he could. But the young man said that if he killed him, the Spiritual Phoenix Academy would find out about it, and the entire academy would be after him. The bloodied Su smiled and asked the youngster, did he really chicken out to fight the old man? Linghan fearlessly smiled and said that it was still scary. No one would want to be chased by a swarm of flies, right? He used a pressure spell, saying that although he was too lazy to kill him, it was still worth it to collect the interest. With the power of the spell, Elder Su was immediately seriously injured. Blood was gushing out of his body. One of his legs was severed and flew several 2 meters away from him. Blood was pouring into the space below him. Old Man Su could no longer stand. He fell to his knees as he had lost a lot of blood. His death seemed to be just around the corner. Lingen asked, looking at it, asking if he wasn't kneeling down now. He said that even dogs would be disgusted by such dirty feet. But suddenly, he turned his attention to the rapidly departing Patriarch Jiang and asked him where was he going in such a hurry. Zhang Feng was extremely nervous, and sweat ran down his face. He excitedly asked the young man what he wanted from him. Powerless and wounded, Zhang Mo lay at Third Master Mu's feet, begging him to spare the Patriarch. Lin Han told the Patriarch that all of the Zhang family stalls in the northern, western, and southern parts of the city now belonged to the Mu family. After saying these words, Patriarch Feng became furious. He was sweating profusely and couldn't find the words to express his emotions. The third gentleman asked him if, given the fact that they all live in Elk, he didn't leave them the east side. Feng said to himself that being confined to someone else's territory meant doing something right under their noses. He gritted his teeth and agreed. But Ling'an said that words are nothing, and in a case like this, it is better to make a contract by signing with a fingerprint. He apologized to Yuzhou, saying that Yun Yi would not look at her even if she was stripped naked. These words irritated the young girl greatly, and she could hardly restrain her anger from answering him. The young man handed the Patriarch a piece of his dress, saying that he could sign it in blood. The old man said he had everything with him. Patriarch Zhang took out a scroll from his pocket, on which he immediately signed with blood from his finger. He rolled up the scroll and held it out to the third master. The young master thanked Patriarch Zhang Feng for such a generous gift. The patriarch didn't answer him anything and simply began to remove. The third Mr. Mu only saw him off with a glance. He held the scroll in his hands, saying that now it was finally their turn. There was a certain intent in his bottomless eyes.